Mysteries of Egypt, Part 2, with Marty Garza and Chuck Kizina. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we are coming to you, as always, not live, from the 10 by 10 by 10 Tangent Cube of Science, where we are nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed, high atop the Edwards Plateau, still thinking about and recovering from the latest Egypt trip, which was absolutely epic. I'm sure those of you who listened to the last episode with Ben are aware of how much fun we had with the group, and we have two members of the group with us, two of the attendees. One you guys will recognize, Marty, a returning guest, Marty of the UFO episodes. Marty, thanks for coming back on the show, buddy.
Great to be back. Different subject this time.
Different subject.
Really?
Is it really?
Come on, bro.
And also joining us, who was in Egypt with us, and he's been in the Discord as well, is our buddy Chuck, known as Oanis in the Discord. Did I just dox you in there? Uh-oh.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll cut it out.
The gift that never stops giving.
Yeah, man. So thanks for coming on the show. Like, why don't you give people a little bit of your background? Because you were really instrumental in several things that happened in Egypt. It was great to have you there. So why don't you tell people about yourself a little bit?
I am a bit of a jack of all trades. I'm a geologist by education, planetary science. Been doing it for a long time. I specialize in the area of environment. I also have a lot of hobbies, one of them being stone cutting and metalworking. So these type of things kind of lend themselves to and I guess even as a kid, built pyramids out of cardboard.
All right.
Stuff, yeah. I put pieces of fruit under them and stuff to see if they rot.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff. So, yeah. So I've been at this a long time. It's a natural fit for a lot of things, and hopefully been helpful and I thoroughly enjoyed the trips.
Yeah, it was awesome to have both of you guys there. And I saw you guys running around, Marty and Chuck running around together like, we're figuring out everything. We're like, no, you're not. I know you think you are, but you're not.
We were always the stragglers.
Yeah. I got pictures of Marty late, the whole bus waiting for him. Some holes.
We had to be shepherded very often.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I knew you guys were really getting into it. So, Marty, I know you have an outline, right? So,
well, no script this time, but yeah, I do have an outline of some of the highlights we want to touch on.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something too, that one of the reasons that Marty and I were talking about getting along and stragglers a lot. Marty's got an engineering background, right?
That's right.
So the way I look at it is that we're kind of complementary on some things. Like one feeds off the other. So it was pretty neat from my perspective. I enjoyed the trip with him.
Yeah,
we were bouncing ideas off each other the whole time. A lot of times and we'll talk about this as we get further in, but there were certain areas that we would look at each other, and we kind of both saw the same thing. You're like, you see that too? Yeah.
Well, okay, Marty, why don't you give people a little bit of your engineering background as well, since we're going to be talking.
Yeah. Well, I had some planetary background as well, only a completely different type of planetary. Planetary gearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been engineering. I've been in the truck industry for over 40 years, and as it was probably mentioned at some point, but I'm in the Monster Truck Hall of Fame. Engineered a lot of revolutionary designs. Probably 95% of the monster trucks that you see today are heavily based on technologies and certain design principles that I implemented back in the early 90s.
Oh, and you've written a book about this, right?
I've got a book that's on it's monster truck technology, the definitive history of the evolution of monster trucks.
Right. You start with Archimedes and work your way forward from there.
Of course, I had to put a lot of sneaky stuff in there too. So there is a lot of background on where a lot of the fundamental technologies came from, from their very origins. And we'll touch on that in this conversation at some point as well.
Okay. Well, so first, overall impressions. This is both of you guys' first time to Egypt, right? Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Marty, why don't you start, and we'll see if you guys can bounce off each other on overall impressions. What do you think in general?
Well, I went into this with obviously, admittedly very high expectations, but I can tell you they were far surpassed. You don't grasp, and I know you know this very well, but you cannot really perceive the impression you're going to get from videos or pictures or anything. Nothing prepares you for actually standing there. I know one of the things, like first day, it was actually the day before the tour started. Russ said, "Hey, I want to walk around the Great Pyramid." So you get there and you start walking, and you walk and you walk and you keep walking, and you feel like you're not making any progress to even make it to the first corner, because it's sitting out in the sand. You have no sense of scale, so you don't grasp how enormous it actually is. But beyond that, beyond the incredible job that all of you did, putting the whole tour together, it was an experience beyond just seeing the sights. It was an overall experience. The camaraderie that we had on the bus, in the hotels, everything, every step of the way, on the boats going down the Nile. It was just absolutely the time of my life. I cannot praise you guys enough for that. It's a memory I will cherish for my entire life.
Wow, man, that's awesome. Same here, 100%. Back of the bus forever, old boy.
Yeah,
we're the emissaries for the back of the green bus.
And I hope they're all listening to this. Yeah.
Oh, I think they are. Yeah. You guys, back of the bus. You know who you are.
Yeah. I feel very much the same way as Marty. And one of the things that I told both of you guys is, this was since I was a little kid, right? I always wanted to do this and never have, for a variety of reasons. And if it weren't for the two of you, I never would have gone on this trip. That was really the reason. And I knew that it would be good, and I had no idea how great it would be. I've traveled around the world. I've gone to a lot of different sites. I've been to ruins. I've been through Mexico. I've been through South America. I've seen lots of things. This is on another level. And the camaraderie, the like-minded people, the open-minded people, the access that we had to see things, and we had sufficient time to see things. And I think the trip was laid out in a way that it, things built on each other. So, it's the best trip ever for me. So I don't know. I don't even know. It's hard to put it into words. So,
Wow.
But but actually, and even being here right now, never would have happened. And I know on my perspective, and I hope Marty's too, this is some pretty exciting stuff we want to talk about.
Yeah.
And I don't know. We're excited about it. We'll see how it goes.
Well, I'm excited.
Hell yeah, bro.
Yeah. Let's go. What's the first topic, Marty? Where are you guys going? Where are you taking it?
Well, I'm going to let Chuck start on this because this is his area of expertise.
Okay.
First, the weathering, because you touched on that in the last episode.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting to see. There's a variety of some of the materials out there, the granites, the things like that, appear to be incredibly old. If you think about it, even in streams and whatnot, those rocks have been there a long time, and some of the pieces are man-made or man-shaped, connected together. And you could see them and touch them, and these things are falling apart.
Yeah.
That can happen. It can be accelerated maybe by fire, maybe by being an acid or something like that, but not pieces out in the open. And so one of the things that I came away with, I always kind of knew, that this stuff was older than a lot of people talk about, but it was very, very evident that some of it was very old. And I wanted to see the weathering in the Sphinx enclosure, right? And seeing that and being able to touch it and feel it was also a big thing. And again, along the same lines, I think there's some ways to get that weathering. Maybe not, there's a lot of variables, right? But it really is a remarkable amount of time has passed since some of these items have been made.
Yeah,
you want to add to that, but
Marty?
Again, not really my area of expertise. I mean, I would say that, as Ben mentioned and you guys discussed in the previous episode, the weathering in the Sphinx enclosure is seemingly illogical. Especially for me, the thing that I took from it is on the headdress on the Sphinx, that the lines that run horizontally they're a fairly shallow detail,
right?
And they're still very
distinct.
Prominent.
Yeah.
It seemed like that would have been the first thing to go away.
I thought the same thing, dude.
And then you see, unfortunately, there's been so much reconstruction on the Sphinx that it's really hard to tell what's original. And I had a 360 camera that I lugged around with me everywhere, and it was on a long selfie stick, and it allowed me to stick it into some of those openings down at the bottom to look to see. And there did appear to be some chambers down there, or some passages. I don't know where they go, but we spent a lot of time walking around it, looking at it from angles that you generally don't tend to see in most of the stuff you see online posted. But definitely it looks really old. And you see, I guess this is a subtle point, but that goes towards the argument that is water erosion rather than wind erosion, is that the corner, especially if you're facing the Sphinx, the left-hand back corner is heavily eroded.
Yeah.
And it looks like that's where the water was all collecting and running down.
There's also I noticed there's a big, I don't know what you'd call it, in one of the walls, a ravine, a deep one cut through that they've filled with stones.
Yeah.
And that's, that is water erosion. Like, how else do you get that? It was so deep and wide that they actually filled it. Somebody filled it with blocks on the Sphinx enclosure wall. Like they were trying to keep it from eroding more. So that was interesting. The other thing I wanted to point out real quick, I didn't mention this in the last episode, was, Marty was talking about how you just can't comprehend the size. Well, I never realized how freaking big the Sphinx is. I mean, it takes a while to walk around that thing.
Yeah,
When you think
it's huge.
Yeah, when you think about it as a single piece monolithic cut statue, basically a sculpture, well, that thing was enormous. And of course it's so modified that it's like Marty was saying, it's difficult to tell what you're looking at, which is why the walls of the enclosure are so interesting now, because they're unmodified for the most part. But still, whatever that statue was originally, it was gigantic, just like everything else on the Giza Plateau.
Yeah, it was interesting for me to listen to Yusuf, and he would talk about, okay, here's the age of this, here's the age of this, here's the age of this. And then I would look at something completely weathered. And then there's something else that's supposedly the same age. It's absolutely not. And a less durable stone. Right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of slop in that. There's just a lot of guessing going on, or a lot of it's just it's not as much of study, I think, spin to it than probably deserve.
But yeah, like they date it contextually or something, right? It's not.
Well, that's how you kind of do it.
Yeah.
It's kind of tough, right?
Yeah.
But I do know, and you all know, I mean, it depends on the conditions that rock is in, but and we saw what's called spherical weathering, right? When something has corners, what it'll do is that's where the most surface area is. So the weathering will work on that first, and eventually things will become rounded.
Yeah.
And some of these pieces are really quite rounded.
Yeah.
But there's pieces that you can see where they were cut into and weathered, where they were tied together with little bow tie connectors, right? So, which is typical of that. Why would they have initially started with a piece of rotten rock and try to connect that together? They didn't. And so, it's pretty neat.
Exactly.
Yeah. So generally in context, I see why Marty started with it. That right off the bat, some of the things that you hear, it's you start questioning, and with an open mind, the weathering is one of the big clues.
So on the big granite stones in Karnak that are heavily weathered that we looked at after we walked through the whole complex, we came out at the end there. You gave a little talk. I videoed it. A couple other people videoed it about the degradation on that stone. Can you give us kind of a recap of that discussion and what do you know as a geologist about how long it takes to break down the stone to where basically the quartz crystals, you could just scrape them off and
they're
get
the most durable.
Yeah,
they're the most durable, and that's why you see a lot of quartz sand, right? Because the other stuff, the weathering will go after the phyllosilicates, the sheet silicates, things like that first, and the rock will start to come apart, and then the feldspars will start to degrade. They turn into clays, things like that, and smaller particles. But a rock is an assemblage of a bunch of minerals, and they're held together by a variety of means. And so what we were looking at is, and Marty and I were lingering somewhere, and you guys had passed it up, and apparently we're all going looking for me, and we had to go back to it. That's kind of what Kyle's getting at. Yeah.
Where's Chuck? Where the hell's Chuck?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. But it was well worth it. And that's what we talked about. We talked about and touched on it a second ago, is the way that rocks weather. These things were well rounded on the outside. I could run my hand across the top and scrape up a handful of weathered material that was just weathering out of the top of it.
Right.
And it's sitting there. It's not sitting in an acid bath. It's not sitting in where it's been burned a lot or something of that sort, although it could have happened in the past. But there's more than one. And these things are shaped. They look to be that they're somewhat in place, or they're together, and it's clear evidence. And I know you want me to say how old I think it is, and I'll stop short of that. I would say very, and I'd say it looks a lot older than the stuff that's sitting there, right? The rest of it.
Yeah.
So for instance, they built upon something else and used something else. You notice when we went through the entryways, in that the entryways where you'd step was granite.
Yes.
And the rest of it was limestone or whatever else, quartzite. But it strikes me that they were using these pieces because they meant something.
Yeah.
Now they're more durable. You can walk on them easier, right? They won't wear down. And that's the point.
Yeah, but it's like, it is interesting that they always had these giant granite slabs in the doorways leading into these temples that were made of sandstone.
Yeah.
And limestone. Yeah. I mean, you see it everywhere in the threshold, these giant pieces of granite. Now, I kind of think the same thing, that these were artifacts that they found, that they put as their threshold of the main entrance into this temple. And I think in a lot of cases, the temples were dedicated, that it seems like to me that the stories behind the temples being dedicated to these gods and goddesses and these stories that the temples are telling seems like an accurate portrayal of what was going on. It's like an honoring or a remembering or a library to say, okay, and then of course within those libraries are these artifacts from the time of the gods or whatever. That's kind of the way
today. We do that today, and I think during that same amount of time, I don't know if it was there, somebody else, I was somewhere else, I was talking about it. There's pieces there made of, I think it was nearby. There's pieces made of travertine, right, which is a calcite, or not quite alabaster, but travertine for sure. And some of the original temples were, I say original, but I know caves were often used as temples, and caves have often travertine, things like that. So it strikes me that if you were moving into your new, everybody was crowding into the cave and got cave's too small, man. We got to go build somewhere else. Well, the cave has some magic to it, right? So you take some of that travertine or you take some of that granite and you bring it to have that connection with the original stuff. And then you build out of it and build upon it. And I think we saw some of that. I felt that way, that we did see some of that.
That's interesting because after the tour was over, we took a little road trip with Yusef, Russ, Ben, and I. And we drove up this highway where they were quarrying the limestone out of the cliff.
In ancient times.
Ancient times, these quarries were caves. I mean, they cut these massive, just monstrous openings into this cliff, and it just I could not believe how huge they were.
Yeah.
They weren't like strip mining down from the top. I mean, I guess they may have been in some places, but what we saw were just these immense openings that they cut deep into the wall of this. And so surely they would have found
Yusuf says that
deposits of alabaster and travertine within these things. Or maybe they were caves originally.
Yusuf said that Petrie had found those and had wondered if they were part of the source for some of the core masonry of the pyramids on the plateau.
Yeah.
They're pretty far away, not as far away as the source for granite, but they're pretty far away. And yes, like Kyle said, these were just massive cavernous openings into the side of this cliff. And there's a highway that kind of goes right down through the area. So we just pulled off the road and climbed up the berm and went into these holes where the ancients had been mining limestone out of the walls.
It was eerie and
it was, yeah.
Oh my God. It was just,
And something you'll hear along the way when Marty and I are going to talk about some things. I'm absolutely convinced, if you've ever been to Rome, particularly the Vatican area and other, you'll see where they didn't paint things. They use different colors of rock.
yes.
And I'm absolutely convinced that it's no mistake that you have a pyramid that's faced with white limestone,
right,
with a black basalt pavement around it, right, with like a red at the Menkaure pyramid, right? It's a red,
and you got a red granite and then a white limestone above that, and it just would have been beautiful,
been fantastic. And when you polish these rocks, they really take on a new deepness of color and richness. I mean, it almost looks like you're looking down into a river with water on it. I mean, they have depth when they're polished.
Yes,
beautiful.
I got the perception of that there was a great deal of time compression there. That some of these things are kind of, from our perspective, it almost seems like they were done in a overlapping time period or somewhat, within a few lifetimes. I think doesn't appear to be the case. This looks like a projects that took many generations each, strung out over potentially thousands of years, many thousands of years.
Yeah.
And potentially a disruption at some point, an extended, 1,200 year maybe disruption, something that was long enough for them to have forgotten how certain things were performed. Like they lost the ability to do things they could do previously. We'll touch on some examples of that.
Yeah, and that's the most recent time that happened. It could have happened other times, and they remembered how to do it, picked up where they left off, right?
Yep.
But the last one is the one we see evidence of. Like you guys have always said, it's like they dropped their tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of brings us into the next, we want to get to some things that probably have not been discussed a whole lot. So I don't want to spend way too much time on topics that you guys have covered a lot. But one thing that ties to what Chuck was just mentioning are the stone vases and plates that we were seeing. We saw a lot of examples of the ones that were there were 40,000 of them in that one
beneath
cave
the step pyramid.
And some of that is just incredible. The workmanship on them is just, hard to believe that they could do such things. And then we saw examples of much cruder versions that were newer, that were off center and things like that. But when we were in the, we're told like the vases that we'd see that have the narrow neck and they have a uniform thickness and they're very symmetrical. And, we're told they were done with spoons and, these explanations that just don't seem to make any sense. But we have to, we're looking at it in pictures and generally can't argue against something just from looking at it from thousands of miles away, right? So we get to the museum and we're walking around, and of course we immediately left the group and started looking at things on our own.
Of course. And
around one of the back sides of one of the display cabinets, there was a vase sitting on a stand. It's the only one of few that you could actually, like a complete one that you could actually handle. And it was tucked away. It wasn't really out where the general public would see it, but we got back there and I looked at it. I went and said, Chuck, you got to see this. Like, come look at it. We started looking at it and it's, it's worked. It's got all this detail. So we put a flashlight in there and we start taking pictures of the inside. You could reach inside. Well, what did we see once we did that? You see the same striations that you see on all the other outside basalt pieces, through the inside, even on the underside of the neck.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things that on the trip that it was important to me, I'm a texture person. When I buy clothes, I have to feel the fabric, right? And you can tell a lot about how something's made by touching it. And what Marty just said was absolutely true. Those things were turned.
Yeah.
There was no question. If anybody says there's another way to do that, I don't know what you, Marty.
Impossible.
The markings are absolutely just like you would turn a piece of wood on a lathe.
Yeah. You going to make one?
Yeah.
All right.
Can we're coming up on a break, but I want to mention one of the strange things that I found under that step pyramid was a solid granite ball about a foot in diameter. So it's like, you would have had to crawl into a very small hole way back there because
You're saying I'm too big around.
No, that's not what I'm saying, Chuck. No, you got me all wrong, bro.
You wouldn't fit, Chuck.
It's a one-way trip.
It was definitely not a walking hallway, so I got dirty down there. I went into every tunnel I went into every one. That was my agenda to go down through every passageway. So I find this ball, and I rolled it around to try to look to see if there was a place where it was fit into the lathe, right? You would see the pinhole where they would have mounted it or whatever, but I didn't find anything. So you're shaking your head. Chuck's shaking his head like I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, which is true.
Yeah, you don't make them like that. You have two. When you make spheres, you have two things that look a bit like cups, and they're tapered on the piece. If you think with a cup with like a little, the edge knocked off of it, and then what you do is you kind of square up the piece, then you start moving it around into these two things. This is how you do it now, and they spin. And then you just keep moving the thing around. And as it gets smaller, the pieces kind of lever in. And then you just make the sphere like that. It's commonly done.
Well, let me explain. It was not perfectly round. It looked like it was roughly shapen into a sort of spheroid, but it was not perfectly spherical. It had some flat, like more flat areas. But it was basically ball shaped.
Was it an oblate spheroid?
Yeah, it was a little wonky, but my thought was like they would have mounted this thing on a lathe and began to cut a vase out of it.
Yeah, drill it with a drill core.
That's what I'm talking about. They core it out, right, and then mount it on a
So it
lathe.
was the raw material
This
for
was
a
the
vase.
chunk that they were going to cut into a vase is what I was thinking. So I'm like, maybe there's a flat surface where they were like going to compress it between two sides of a lathe and start spinning it to start cutting the outside or core it or whatever. Anyway, I didn't see any tool marks on it. It looked as though it was roughly hammered into the sort of spherical shape. But the thing that was strange to me is that down in the caves where these things, where the vases are found, is one that is unfinished. It's like a chunk that hasn't been made into a vase.
Yeah.
Why would you bring that down
I don't
into
know.
this place if you're the vase maker? So to me, it's
That's a great
evidence.
point.
It's evidence that
Yeah.
the people who brought
Yeah.
those vases down into that cave did not make them. They were taking them as artifacts from somewhere else.
Yeah.
I'm with you 100% on that. And by the way, that's called a preform.
The preform.
So
there
what
you
you
go.
do, you preform whatever you're going to do, then you can make a variety of things out of it. And that's done with gemstone cutting. You do your preform by hand, and then you hook it up on a machine and do your faceting, for instance.
Yes.
So that's a common way of cutting stones.
Awesome.
And for the sake of the listeners, this was 5 levels down underground. We were way down.
Yeah,
And
we were way down.
in these
In a
very
maze.
rough tunnels. Yeah, this is not. They were definitely not shaping materials down in.
That's
those
what I'm
tunnels.
thinking. They weren't lathing these things.
Somebody
down in that
carried that ball down there a
Yeah,
long
right.
way.
Yeah, it was. And before we get away from the subject,
Well, we're not.
pieces that were down there. Oh, okay, good, because the pieces that we're talking about being turned on lathes and whatnot were crisp. They
Yeah.
look new.
Yeah.
They're broken, but they look new. It's unbelievable.
Wow. All right. With that, we'll take a break and we'll come back for more because I don't want to leave this topic yet, Chuck.
Okay.
I
down.
got to
Calm
prove
down,
to
Chuck.
everyone how wrong you are about everything.
You know, keep trying.
We'll be right back.
Quest.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, here with Chuck and Marty. Continuing on with this discussion of the vases found under the step pyramid of Dozier. 40,000 of them, they say. And yet down in those caves, in the tunnels underneath, there are still piles and piles of fragments of broken vases. So I'm not sure if the 40,000 includes all the broken ones.
Yeah. And
But
also
apparently there's just storerooms full of whole vases that are not displayed in the museum.
And there's also deeper levels that they're still
Yeah.
digging out. So who knows?
They're working on level 6. I think we got into level 6 and right?
Yeah.
And then there's more
Yep.
below that. And so yeah, there's should be plenty. So we're going to look at some pictures. We're not doing video on this episode, but we'll try to describe as best we can what we're looking at. Maybe you can put some stuff in the show notes. I'm not going to volunteer Russ for that job. But
Yeah, and I'm going to
Sort
upload
of.
a lot of this up into the Discord too. I've been holding off because I knew we were going to cover some of this stuff. Well, I want to mention something. It's a little bit of a funny little anecdote, but I think it's illustrative of some of the little subtleties that can be very impressive. While we were down there, Yusef and I kind of ventured off a little bit, went down a tunnel that was kind of a little barrier when we kind of went around and went. Because Yusef, it looked like it was a little bit new to him because he was kind of looking around, and in the walls of this tunnel, there were all these like baskets that were kind of in the dirt, but it was like settlement, sedimentary dirt or something, but they're actually baskets. He was pulling on them, and there's all this, shards pottery shards, and he's pulling them out, looking at them, and I pull out one of them, and it's just this incredible piece. It's just maybe a 1/16 of an inch thick, translucent, worked piece, and I'm just marveling at this thing. And he looks at me, he goes, "Do you realize that piece you're holding in your hand is older than Moses?"
Oh, yeah.
I was like, holy cow.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's something else. I mean, it's just, it is hard to describe what it's like being down there. You know, I imagine that these artifacts were brought there because they were revered by the people who dug those tunnels. But I don't know. I mean, it's just so mind-blowing how many were put down there. The tunnels are still going. They're still digging them out. So
Yeah.
We don't know how much is down there.
It was a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. Every basket of dirt that you have to take out of that tunnel has to go a really long way
Yeah.
to get out.
Yeah, and as Ben points out in his videos and in the presentation he gives, which he did give when we were there, is that even the mainstream archaeologists acknowledge that these vases were inherited objects. They just say from first and second dynasty period. But he also points out that at least one of them was found in a Paleolithic tomb, surrounded by artifacts of much, much cruder work, you know, like what you would expect from a Paleolithic civilization, like pre-end of Ice Age, 14,000 years old, or so, in the midst of the end of the Ice Age there. So look, if there's one of these vases found in a 14,000-year-old tomb, it's Paleolithic, and that may mean that the rest of them are much older than that too. Because if somebody at that period is burying an artifact with themselves, then they clearly didn't have the technology to build it because of the rest of the stuff that was in the tomb. So they must be older than that. So they were already being revered as artifacts, it seems like, at that point. So how old are they really? So, Marty, what, Yusuf is telling you, it's older than Moses, but I mean, it might be older than everything that we know about in terms of human civilization. You might have been holding an object in your hand that was 25,000 years old.
Could be. And also, there's the possibility that there were,
maybe they were
civilizations, living near or at the same time as,
as
hunter-gatherer peoples that they may have gifted some of their stuff to them.
Yeah, sure.
It's a possibility. So you guys were wanting to get into some details on your observations of the vases. So let's hear it, boys.
Well, that was, main thing I wanted to point out was the fact that there were striations on the inside of that, because, the whole spoon, theory goes out the window when you see the striations. They're circular. These things were being turned on something. So, that was really the main point that I wanted to make. I will say that on the outsides, we looked at a few things, like, for example, this one had handles on it, and the handles were drilled, and we actually checked. The handles were not drilled with the same curvature as the outside of the vase.
Right.
They were actually drilled straight from each side and met in the center. So they were straight drills.
That's something I had heard in the past too, that those curves were the same. They're not. They just came in from both sides and drilled them.
Now, what's interesting about that too is that some of the handles are also, like, the handles themselves are straight. So it's like when they were turning the rest of the bowl or the vase, they had to remove the tool and go around this block that they're leaving that's going to be shaped into the rounded handle, and then put the tool back down and cut another, a little more than, a third of the way around, and then lift the tool off again to go around this handle that's sticking out. And then they somehow cut that handle into this almost like a cylinder embedded into the side of the bowl, or into the side of the vase. it just this seems like I've never done lathe work like this. I mean, I've done some spindly table legs or something like that, but this seems like a huge job.
It's the hard way to do it.
It's the very hard way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a special piece. That's a special piece you're looking at.
Yeah, the handles being off like that means you cannot turn it in a conventional sense, not all the way. You'd have to stop when you got to where the handles were. And how you continue the curvature between the handles is beyond me without using a mill or something,
And that's some of the stuff you're going to hear us talking about, that some of the works that we're looking at, it's more than a one-step process. I think people sometimes try to oversimplify. They said, okay, they just scooped it out, or they just did this, did that. It's more than a single-step process. And the outsides are finally finished, and you guys have heard me before. I'm convinced they used abrasives like corundum and particularly diamond. I'm 100% on that bandwagon. To cut and polish this kind of stuff is you need a pretty durable abrasive.
Right. Yeah. And I'm with you on that too. And I think, that's also what Petrie thought.
Yeah.
He was very, I think he was pretty convinced that that's what they were using in some way. It would be nice to find some remnants of those materials, but we don't know where they were making these vases.
No. And if we look at a thin piece, there's a photo here. We're looking at a very thin piece. Marty, how thick do you think those edges are?
It's under a 16th. It's definitely under 0.65.
It's a small piece.
Yeah, the whole shape, and it's a complex shape. It's got multiple curves. That would be a challenge to machine. It would. Or it would take a very skilled machinist to turn this.
Like out of steel or something, right?
Because out of this material that's pretty fragile, got to be using a really good bit.
If I were going to make this, what I would do is I would cut the inside first, and then I would fill the inside with pitch or whatever I had that was
to make it solid again, and
like a heavy wax or a pitch or something like that to make it solid
and support it. Yeah.
And before I did that, I'd make a template of the inside, right? Then I'd make a template of the outside, and I just cut the outside down and then just flip it upside down, mill out the pitch.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is when you're doing it that way, you have to have control. You have to have, with a CNC program, where the inside is. So you know how deep to cut to follow the shape so that you have uniform thickness. If you're just doing this in a lathe, it can be tricky. You're guessing how thick you're going to make that piece.
That's a really good point.
You have to have a transfer fixture because you're going to be cutting the inside, and you can't have it eccentric, right? It has to be center on center.
What's a transfer fixture? Explain that.
If you're cutting gemstones, you cut the top, right? And then you have a little block, and the block has the gemstones are affixed to what's called a dop, and you have a dop that it's on and one that it's going to be on, and they both lay in a little cradle exactly at the same height, and then you use the adhesive. You adhese it to the new one, right? So you can now cut the other side of it, and then you have to release the adhesive or wax or whatever you're using on the other side of the stone. So you have to have two, like an axle. They have to be exactly the same on both sides, and you transfer your working piece from one to the other. So they have to be, because I think, aren't there some examples of some of these pieces that are, when Johnson put it on the machine, it was kind of offset.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. There are,
and I think that's when that process went bad.
You can see that when they cut them inside, or whichever one they did second, like if they did it like you're saying, they cut the inside first, then they cut the outside, that when they fixed it to the tool, it wasn't the same center that they used to cut the inside. So it's thicker on one side of the vase than the other, the wall.
Yeah.
That seems clear. I've seen that on multiple fragments that I've been able to handle, that they do, in some cases, taper in thickness. Now, I'm not looking at the entire thing.
That's telling you something, though.
Yeah, that tells you
that it's spinning, because if this was done by hand, as they claim with spoons, the guy working the stone could easily compensate for that. The fact that it's eccentric like that means it was spinning.
I can buy
And
that.
they cut it for a while till they figured it out. They didn't figure it out right away.
Right.
Yeah.
And
This raises a point about something that's, I think, pervasive throughout all of Egypt. And we saw this time and time again, and it's so easy to overlook things that are so obvious that you don't see them, right? One of the things that struck me going through the museum and seeing piece after piece after piece of these just insanely detailed pieces that must have taken an enormous amount of time to work. They did cuts in areas that, honestly, to me, there was a very high degree of confidence involved in this. In other words, they could have spent weeks, months, I don't know, years, maybe some of this work. I mean, that's not beyond the realm of possibility because there was so much detail involved in some of this. But you could work for 6 months to a year and then make one mistake and you ruin the whole piece. And they did things that were astonishing, like some pieces that some machining or whatever was done, they had to get it right. There was very little, if any, margin for error whatsoever. And the fact that they did this over and over and over means these people were very confident in whatever machines or equipment or their own skills or all of the above.
The technique. They're confident in the technique, whatever it was. Yeah. Yeah, Marty's right. I mean, if you get to a certain point, if you make that mistake, that's another thing. You go to gemstone cutting. If you make a mistake cutting a stone, you just repeat the mistake all the way around it. No one will ever see it because it's right. That's what you do.
Yeah.
But here, that ain't gonna happen, right? Unless you give them another another eyeball or something. I don't know. Yeah. So it's really interesting. It's very sophisticated work.
And what do you think, Chuck? What do you think about all the different stone types that they were making these incredibly thin, precise vases out of? I mean, does it seem like they were, again, you're talking about they're confident in their work. Does it seem abnormal to you? Like
No,
no,
not a bit. And Marty and I were talking about this. This spills over into some of the other pieces. In any time you're going to be making something. You've got engineers that are saying, okay, this is a good material. You're going to make it out of that. And Marty, who else do you have on the team that when you're going to make stuff that has to weigh in on it?
the marketing guy.
Nope.
The marketing guy is like, I want it out of this.
The
stuff.
art department, right?
Yeah.
The designers.
Yeah.
The designers. Yeah, right?
That was
So
one of the points that we were going to hit when we get to the pyramid discussion, because there's some.
Do not block this discussion.
Yeah, no.
None of this will get
It's
to
as
that.
good as any. But I think people have a tendency to just say, "Well, they just did this or they just did that." I'm like, no, you don't understand. These are not simple processes. This is jumping ahead a little, but building a pyramid isn't stacking blocks. And I'll explain as a little bit better why I say that from an engineering standpoint as we get a little bit further. But understand that these things were very purposefully built. They were engineered. There's no chance that these things were just assembled as they went along. Not a chance in hell that happened. These things. And we'll show you examples of that in just a minute. But
yeah, we'll get to that.
Right. But in other words, in some cases, you had quarries that were a great distance away. So you had an engineering team, you had a quarrying team, you had a transportation department, you had. You were talking a minute ago about the different materials, that whether it was granite or basalt or whatever. Well, the guy that picks, okay, this floor is going to be black granite and this one's going to be red. That's not the engineer. Engineers don't care about that kind of stuff. That's going to be your interior designers, right? That's a whole different skill set, So now you've got to have project managers on site. You've got to have supply managers because you're sourcing materials from lots of different places. So, you know, and in a project of that size, you don't, the guy that's managing the construction cannot be checking with his suppliers to see where the stuff is. Or so you have all these different levels. You've got machine shops that are working the stones. Those are not being done on site because the guys that are pulling on ropes or whatever, building ramps or whatever, you know, absolutely ridiculous methods that people have envisioned on how these things were done, that are actually less are almost in some cases more incredible than the ones that we speculate on. Yeah. They don't have time to be shaping stones.
Well,
They're moving, right?
You got to have, I mean, you're contracting giant triangle ramp company. I mean, that's not even the same guys that are building the pyramid. That's a totally different company.
Right. And maybe they're pre-fitting certain sections off-site.
Yes.
And then bringing it in so you know it's together.
Which means they have to go in certain place. Had to know where certain stones were going to be placed in advance.
Yeah.
You know, certain 10 stones out of the 2.5 million or whatever that are going to go in this thing have to be of this specific dimension and have these properties and have these colors. And in other words, people grossly oversimplify a project of this type.
Yeah.
Then you've got workforces of this size. You've got to feed them. You don't want them, okay, you're going to tell, oh, it's noon. The guy that's up, you know, at the top of the mirror, come down to come have lunch and then go back. No, you got to have catering. You got to have the guys that are running back and forth, taking them water, taking them food, things like that. You got to have the quality control because, man, the detail on some of this stuff on massive projects like that, yet there's the attention to detail is insane. So you've got quality control. Then you've got even the pharaohs or whatever still had to manage money. In other words, whatever commerce was being traded, whatever products for certain things being brought from other places. So you have to have a finance department. You have to, in other words, there's just layers and layers and layers of people. So this isn't just stacking blocks.
Oh, man. This is
it's
great.
Not just work teams.
Yeah, we got to get an economist to like work on this. I want to know like what, you know.
Yeah, what
break this down. Like
what level of economy does it require to do these kind of projects?
Do a project like this.
Yeah.
The civil engineers, a completely different department. In other words, the guys, especially like on the Great Pyramid, where they had to level that and where they're digging away at the foundation on one end.
That's the middle pyramid. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they're having to build up the other end and then put in these massive slabs. That's civil engineering. That's completely different than the construction side. Those engineers were different guys. They had to be surveying.
Yep.
And, you know,
yes,
I can't imagine.
Just the site prep is a ridiculously massive job. Yeah.
And and one of the things that, which the bent pyramid, I think, has the corners blown out on the bottom. So
yes,
when you do this, you have to understand the compressive strength of the materials. And when we were looking at it, you'd look across some of it, and some of it's weathering differently, right? It's almost like they said, we need, these blocks. It's a certain kind of granite with the compressive strength of this. Oh, we got some from another quarry. It's the same. It's fine. They bring it in, right? And it doesn't have the compressive strength. So they start building this thing. They're getting all this weight squeezing down on it, and the stuff starts to pop on the bottom levels, right? And that's exactly where it would go. So things like that happen, right? Then they said, oh, geez, how are we going to retrieve the project now, right? So they punt. But it's like Marty's saying, it's very complicated stuff. You have to have planning all the way down at the very beginning to even source the materials, right?
Are you suggesting that the bent pyramid was an accident? Like that they changed the angle because of a problem with the foundation?
The corners blew out. That's where you'd think it would happen. I mean, I don't know.
Well, the story is that was quarried. That was quarried out of there.
Yeah, possibly. Why did they go after the corners of all the other ones?
That's the easiest place you would imagine to start.
Yep. We don't know because the other ones don't have any facing stones left.
Well, you notice around Minkare that it's the middle wall of the pyramids that have the most casing stones in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I'm just surmising. I
Sure,
don't know.
yeah.
It just struck me that and maybe
You
if they're
could be
cracked,
right.
those are the easiest ones to get at.
You could be right. I mean, it's a hot
Absolutely.
take.
Yeah.
It's a hot
Who
take.
knows?
I hadn't heard
Yeah.
it before.
Yeah,
We're looking at a picture. This is one of the design features that I'm referring to from an engineering standpoint. What this struck me, and this is what started making me think about that. This stuff was all engineered in advance, and then you go, well, okay, in order to do that, to source materials, that means what we're looking at here, for example, is this is the interior of one of the pyramids. I don't even remember which one because they all seem to follow the same design principle. Every one that we went inside.
Pretty sure this is the middle pyramid.
The doorways were always in the corner of the room, not centered in the room. And they were always smaller. And the stone above the doorway, which was cantilevered out over the door, was always like roughly 4 times the size of all the other stones around it.
Yeah.
So think of this logistically. First of all, they had to engineer those blocks to go in that place. They made them that size. They made them thicker because the engineer recognized that it was cantilevered out and there was more leverage working on that stone. It needed to be upsized. It suggests that at some point they may have built one that didn't have that feature and it failed and they learned from their mistake. But so the engineer designs the doorways, and let's say there's multiple doors because there's usually a stone on each side of this. So there's at least, for every door, there's at least 2 of these massive blocks. Well, that means that there had to be a set of plans that showed where these particular stones went. Then the quarry, which could be as much as 900 kilometers away, had to know they had to cut a certain number of stones bigger than the other ones because it wouldn't make any sense to ship all big ones and make them heavier than they needed to be and then have them sized at the site. That doesn't make any sense. So that means the people at the quarries had a set of blueprints or specifications. They knew what they needed to ship to the site for the guys on site to build from.
Yeah.
So and they were right about the leverage on them because several of them had cracks over the doorways, and they actually had strain gauges. They've been measuring, I guess, to see whether
the cracks are widening.
The cracks are widening.
Yeah, there were strain gauges everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, we saw this over and over again, and that's where I started thinking, like, okay, this was a pretty complex, logistical problem.
Yeah.
Chuck has suggested that he thinks that these things, if you were to disassemble this, there may be numbers on them somewhere. Like they knew where, like they might have been at least to some degree pre-engineered.
Mason's marks is what they call them.
Yeah.
Yeah. To where they knew, okay, this is the one that goes here and this is the one that
They have found stones with Mason marks.
Yep.
Mason's marks.
No, there you go.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think y'all are totally right. This is
on point for sure. Yeah. And I also like the idea of them. I would say they probably didn't. I would say that they did some stress testing.
That's
if you're
what I wanted to ask.
You don't make a mistake and build a pyramid and then have the door crack. Instead, you're putting up mock. There's the what are they called? The test chambers, the test passages.
Yeah.
So there is some indication that they did some testing on what they wanted to do.
The geometry of the passageways.
Yeah, the geometry of the passageways. So, if you were going to build a giant thing like this, you could either you knew the properties of the stone very well, and so you could just do some calculations like civil engineers do now with materials. And so you would say, well, the block needs to be this big over this entryway because it's going to be cantilevered out and it's going to have a lot more pressure on it, and it needs to be able to handle that without cracking.
That was in my head, but I'm trying to not like over, or say, okay, they knew how to calculate stress levels. They probably did, but I'm not making that leap.
I would make it because you can't climb through this stuff and think to yourself, these people didn't know what they were doing or they were just figuring it out. I mean, come on,
not a chance.
They were
massive.
Yeah, that rock is homogeneous too. When you look at them, some of the ones you see have different veins or the feldspars or whatever go through that. If you look at these dudes here, These things had to be strong, homogeneous. They're made for purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
They picked this block. They're
These
like this
stones
part
over the doorway.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only the size, not only whatever, but I want the stuff that's going to hold together the best, which is probably finer grained.
Like for example, it's this. We're looking at a picture of one of the doorways, and it's standing. This stone is standing there, and next to it there are three, and they are the three stacked together. I mean, the precision, the fit on them is incredible, but they are probably within microns of the height. In other words, they calculated these three together with whatever was gonna, if there was any mortar or anything that was gonna go in between them. They had it so accurate that stone is the almost exact same height as this much larger stone. That's an accomplishment in itself. That's only one of many in this.
And if you think about it, we started out talking about the stone vessels and things like that. If you can fit a piece like this accurately, making those stone vessels could be a side job.
Yeah. You're right. Because it's crazy. We look at those vases and they're beautiful, they're polished, and they're thin. But then you look at this and they're achieving a similar kind of accuracy, but on this enormous scale. And it's just, and within a gigantic structure, that's been subject to earthquakes and all kinds of other stuff, and nothing has moved. It's just amazing.
Crazy.
All right. Well, we're up on another break.
This is great, guys.
Yeah, this is really awesome.
I'm glad we took a small brain geologist on the trip with us. By the way, folks, if you heard the last episode, this Chuck is the small brain geologist famous for the taste test of the black goo.
You know what? You guys never asked the question about the black goo. What's the question?
Did it taste good?
That's close. First of all, I heard you say I wiped my finger on it. That's for children.
I asked.
For children.
Oh, you just
licked the box.
You just licked the box. Okay.
I licked the box. So what's the question? You got to ask what it tastes like, right?
Yeah,
what did the box taste like?
What did it taste like?
Chicken.
We'll be right back. I can't even take this.
I thought it would taste like snakes.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent Podcast, coming to you not live from the Tangent Cube, joined by Marty and Chuck, who were with us in Egypt. And the discussion is covering many topics, but mostly we're looking at engineering, precision, and it's great to get these guys' insight. Especially, Chuck, who's willing to do a taste test on strange black goo in the bottom of a 100-foot hole on an ancient tomb.
That's genius.
There's like bones lying around on the floor. And he's like, yeah, I'll taste this.
Well, you were misleading people. You said I did it with my finger.
It was. I asked.
How dare you insult him like that?
Yeah.
No, it's either that or he's jealous.
Yeah. I wouldn't have tasted it. I'm glad you did it.
No, I did.
So
it tastes like oil.
Yeah, I believe it. I know you guys have places you want to go and topics to discuss, but I really want to ask this about the engineering and the stress testing of stone. One of the things I noticed on the trip was in places where we saw the saw cuts on perhaps like pieces of basalt, clearly, striated lines along a surface. There were some of those stones that looked like that flat saw cut surface had been hammered off with some kind of like hammer action to create that more pillowy face of the stone. Did you guys notice this anywhere? In other words, the furthest, like the most outward portion of the stone was the saw cut. and all around it, it had been hammered away. That flat surface of the saw cut had been hammered away to make it. I don't know. It was like more rough, and it occurred. I started seeing this in multiple places, and it occurred to me that, and this is also part of what I noticed in the Serapeum, that these boxes, the unfinished box is hammered all around, inside and out, and it looks like it's got this hammer action. And I wondered if that was some form of stress test that they may have cut the thing out with their whatever rough cut tools. They're just getting the general shape that they wanted. And then if they hammered all over the surface of the stone, would that be one way of checking if it would form a crack or if it would split in two during that hammer action? Or I don't know. What do you think about that?
I'm waiting for Marty.
You can probably definitely comment more on the stresses, but I pulled up a picture of one really strange example of exactly what Kyle's talking about. I believe this was Elephantine Island. There was this one very large stone. What is this, basalt or something?
This is granite.
Yeah, it's
granite, black granite.
diorite.
Okay. And it's saw cut. It's definitely saw cut because it's flat, but the probably outer 3 inches of the cut appears to be chiseled down. It's recessed. It's slightly recessed before you get to the lip of where the saw cut stopped. It was a very strange piece.
Now, I did notice this on the inside corners of the boxes, that the corners themselves were actually recessed from the larger plane of the inside of the box.
Yeah, it's subtle. It's few thousands.
Very subtle.
It's not a lot, but it's definitely, you can see this. I worked trying to find a good light angle where you could see this, and you can kind of really see that in this picture. It's about 3 inches all the way around.
It's like a frame almost.
Yeah. Not exactly what I'm talking about. I think we saw this basalt at Abu Ghraib or Abu Sir, where you could see the clear saw cut, but it was the most outer surface, and then the rest of the surface had been hammered away to make a nice flat surface. But it was definitely, they hammered off the saw cut part. It was
the only thing
strange.
I could think of along those lines is maybe that just for artistic reasons they wanted it like that. And you'll see that on gravestones do that, right? They'll have the edges textured. But the other part of it is, if you were doing it for competency, I don't know if that's the best way. If you whack something a few times and it rings a bit, it's probably not got a crack in it, right? You'd be able to tell.
Okay.
So I don't know that you'd, and it seems to me if you did that a lot, if you weren't careful, you run the risk of then breaking it.
Yeah.
But it seems like
I don't know. Yeah, I wish I would have seen it.
Okay. Well, it also, I know you're not ready to go to the Serapeum yet, but that unfinished box in the Serapeum does not look saw cut. It looks hammered. The whole thing, inside and out. The entire surface looks hammered to me.
Yeah. It's covered in very similar shaped pockmarks, basically.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, and you never know. Someone could have just come at it later on too. Who knows?
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you guys don't have any answers for me. That's all right.
No, because if you're gonna put a plaster, you're gonna put something like that on. You can't really. You're probably not the best thing to put it on a smooth surface.
No, that's a good
Rough it up,
point.
right?
If they were wanting it to adhere to a plaster.
Yeah, and they do that,
Or
right?
a plaster to adhere to the stone. That's yeah. Okay.
I know exactly what you're talking about, the texture, and we'll circle around to that. There are 2 boxes with that finish. There are 2 similar boxes in the Serapeum that have that finish you're talking about. And there may be a reason why those 2 boxes are similar.
I must have been that.
You talking about the other one, the limestone one? Because it's roughly hammered, yeah.
Yeah, there's
Yes.
and then the
Yeah.
granite, the rose granite one is also rough.
Yeah, I mean, related to the saw cuts, like we're looking at one that Russ pointed out when we were there. People that try to argue that these are not saw cuts, that they were done with bow or whatever they say that they're with sand and things like that. Like they're literally like, what is it? The blind man in the in the China shop or something. What's that saying? I mean, you're trying to not see something that is plainly obvious to anybody that, I mean, you don't have to be
this
very
one's very
versed
clear.
in a shop.
Yeah.
I mean, this one we're looking at, you can see the curvature of the outside of the blade. I mean, and the striations are exactly in line with the outside edge. So this is not if this was a saw by hand going back and forth, the striations would be in different directions. You're never going to be able to keep everybody's arms moving exactly the same parallel in the same arc throughout this massively long cut.
Right.
I mean, this was most definitely a machine that cut this.
So it's
stone.
We're looking at the top of a broken piece. It's some kind of dark material, probably granite.
It looks basalt to me.
It could be basalt.
Quartzite, who knows?
Yeah. And the striations in it were very clear. There's a lower lip that has an obvious curve, and all the striations on it are very similar, homogeneous, and they follow each other back and forth. Like I wonder if you could probably measure them, and they're almost all the same width. And they also follow the curve perfectly of the bottom of the cut. It looks like a gigantic circular saw made this cut.
Yeah. It definitely was.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt about that.
So yeah, that's as a I would say it looks like that. These guys are saying there's no doubt. I agree, there's no doubt, but I'm not an expert. I haven't cut a lot of stone, but Chuck has. Yeah.
We saw a few examples.
So you would be able to I would want to say you would be able to take some measurements from that thing and estimate the size of the blade.
Oh, no doubt about it.
And it looks like, I mean, I'm thinking, it might be 15 or 20 feet.
Yeah. and you'd almost want that because you don't have to get the tip speed of the blade up. You want to increase the diameter.
Right. You can spin it slowly and the edge is going to be moving fast. Yeah.
I would guesstimate that that saw blade was 8 to 10 feet in diameter.
8 to 10. Okay.
Yeah. That's why I wanted something in the picture for scale. You put the lighter there, I think it was.
My vape. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted that because I can put that into Inventor and I can CAD it out and I could tell you exactly the diameter of the
good deal.
of this blade. But we're looking at another one. This one is out on the Giza plateau. There was a stone there that is worked on several sides, and it has some really obvious saw cuts in it. But at one end, you can see where they changed the angle of the blade.
Yep.
Or should I say there was a relative change between the angle of the stone and the angle of the blade. And there are multiple cuts. And this one, again, for someone to say that they did this by hand, this was clearly a mistake. The blade drifted. And they stopped and replaced it and cut again, and it did it right, trying to fix a mistake. If you were doing this
over
by
and
hand,
over and over again, they trying to fix it.
The minute it started veering off, you would just replay. You would just restart. I mean, like I think I heard Ben say, like, what did they sawed for 3 days and then they go, oh no, we messed it up. Let's start again, and then they sawed for another 3 days and messed it up. And in other words, it's completely illogical. The striations follow the lines of the saw. I mean, this is plainly obvious. This was a massive saw, but it brings up a completely different question. This stone, and it's related to the last one that I said, okay, the saw appeared to be 8 to 10 feet in diameter that this stone was being cut by. I would say that saws of this size would have to be fixed. And that's where I suggested, and I don't think it's a new idea, that some of these things they call, quote, boat pits.
The boat pits
might be saw pits.
Yeah.
But that raises a completely different problem. Now you have to have fixtures to push the stones into the blade.
Right.
And they have to be fixtures. They're not being done by hand because they have to maintain parallel surfaces or right angle surfaces. They're making things that are precision, they're not askew.
Yeah, you can't risk getting that rock in there and have it go askew and break the blade.
Right. Again, that's that confidence, that degree of confidence. You know,
Right.
you look at the boxes at Elephant King Island and everything. Do you think they were going to take a chance of cutting that crooked? So what was being used? Now, there's multiple problems here. Like I could envision some water, potentially like a water-powered saw, and we saw some evidence of maybe some of these sites might have been industrial sites where they were doing this kind of work. But the fixtures and whatever was, these are very heavy stones. So it's not that easy to be pushing that into a cutting edge. So
no, this could also be a result of the abrasive on the cutting wheel wearing off on the one side and not the other, right? So this thing kept going crooked. And it's, come on, try it again. We got to get one more piece, and then
before replacing the blade.
Yeah, before replacing the blade, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to throw something else in here too when Marty was talking about the saw pits. I mean, none of us know what the topography around these pyramids was. And I was thinking, where's the borrow area for all the limestone, right? And that whole area could have been full of hills all around it.
Yeah.
And they flattened it.
Right.
You only have to take it not very far at all if you're just cutting down the hills next to it. That's chiseling. Yeah. The picture we're looking at right now is completely different.
The curvature looks opposite direction. That's more like a bow drill. Like a bow saw.
When you look at the shapes of the different cuts, it's pretty obvious to see the difference. But I don't know. When we were talking about what we're going to chat about, a lot of this stuff's been covered before: tube drills, saws, things like that. A lot of people have talked about it, but I think when Marty and I were there, we spent just a few minutes on that. It was quick. The decision that that's what they used was pretty fast. It had all the evidence of it. So we didn't put a lot of thought into it past.
This one was complicated. This was a stone that had a very long angular cut. This was a really large stone that had imagine, for the people at home listening, imagine you had this long rectangular block and from the upper corner, you cut a 45-degree cut into the stone, right? Towards the center of the stone. Then at the end, they cut another 45 at the corner. The problem is they're not cutting all the way to the end. The corner is still there. They cut just inboard of the corner. You can't do that with a bow saw. You can't not cut the corner.
Right.
This had to be a fixed circular blade to be able to stop. In fact, you can see the curvature of the inside of the cut.
And this is aside from all the other saw cuts you can see on the piece too.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah,
all over it.
Like you're saying, they're doing a plunge cut with a circular blade there.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. How do you not, in other words, if you're going back and forth, you've got guys on these big saws, right? There's a huge stone. So how do you not cut the end of the block?
I see. Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
Fascinating.
I also saw evidence of what I would consider like a wire saw or, a rope saw possibly, but I think wire because there were some lips at the end of the cuts, and it looks like it was a very fine blade, whatever was doing the cut. But like with the circular saw, at the leading edge, the cutting edge where it stops, you see that curvature, right? That curvature is always concave. But with a wire saw, the leading edge is always going to be convex. And the only way to get a convex cut with a circular saw would be to raise the saw and then go back down. But of course, the striations would all show the concave nature of the circular saw, whereas these rope saws, the striations didn't show that curvature. So, and then also with a wire saw or whatever, it would, as you're cutting through the stone, it can flex and, kind of going around harder parts of the stone. So the cutting, like the surface that it cuts isn't always flat. It can bow in and bow out. as you go down. So you can have like complex curves on the cut surface, and that's what I saw in multiple places.
I don't see any reason why there wasn't a combination of, just like used today,
Yeah.
a combination of what, like a wire. As long as you have an abrasive, that's on the way to move the abrasive.
But it's it's how narrow this wire is.
Yeah.
That you're like, they must have had some really like the tensile strength of this thing was great in order to be only 1/8 of an inch thick. It wasn't hemp and rope.
No, I get it. Yeah.
And I saw it in basalt as well as alabaster.
We're looking at a block here, and this will be a little hard to describe, but we were jokingly referring to it as a Johnson block because it has multiple cuts on it. But the beauty of it is that there's a 90-degree cut that shows you the thickness of the blade they were using to cut this.
Perfectly.
Right. And then they came back in and they cut 90 degrees to that one. So you've got a corner, right? But then they made several passes, like they didn't cut it right. And then they started the blade again and then they cut it again. But what this is showing is look, because there is a piece that is rough. This was a rough finish and they cut right to it, but they left a little triangle there. So that's telling you how thin of a sliver they cut out of this. Yeah. That's hard to do. It's easy to cut wide. It's like cutting a ham, you know. It's real easy to cut thick ham. It's hard to cut thin ham. You have to have a really good knife, right?
You have to have a good fixture to hold it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And feed rate. Feed rate has to be controlled.
Feed rate has a lot to do with that. And these type of things are hard to do with like a very slow moving handsaw.
Or a diorite ball.
Yeah. Try pounding that one. See if you can work that out.
Get that down that crack.
So there's
I definitely have a precision
in
ham saw fixture in my house, guys.
So,
yeah.
Well, do we want to?
I want to mention something about the Serapeum boxes.
Okay, that's where I was going to go. I'm glad you went there.
So, I hear a lot of talk about, I don't know, about the little, and I'll call them scoop marks for less of anything else, but that's because that's how everybody relates to them. And so the idea that's gone around is that they didn't want any imperfections in the box. And a very good reason for that is if you have a crack, the crack will propagate. So you want to get the crack out of there. There could be reasons for, like Kyle, I mean, I know you're looking into it for resonance and things of those, things for those reasons. Just a couple other things to think about when we're looking at this and what struck me. First of all, it struck me that something was put into these boxes, and the boxes were made in such a way that if the room collapsed, if the mountain collapsed on this thing, those boxes are going to be fine, and whatever's inside of them is going to be fine. And the other reason to get rid of a crack is you can't decontaminate something that has a crack, because the bacteria or whatever is going to be down inside. And if that's the case, if you were decontaminating the inside and the outside of this for some reason, I'm just surmising, it's just another reason to have something perfectly smooth. Then
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Then if you do that, how if you take a microscope or something and the outside almost looks like it has a bit of a varnish on it, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to polish something, you're kind of the process is using finer and finer grits, and you end up with a polished surface, but it doesn't really always leave a varnish, if you wish, right? But if you were decontaminating this thing, I don't know, maybe something worked on the outside, but it strikes me that that's another really good reason not to have a crack.
Wow.
That's a great point.
And this thing seals up by molecular attraction, right?
Yeah.
So it just, if I were to weave a tail, I'm putting something in those boxes that I'm going to come back and get later, that if the hill collapses on it, I can mine them out of there. It'll be airtight, and I decontaminated it first, so there's no mold or anything else in there that's going to eat whatever I put in it. so I can come back and get it.
That's really cool. So some form of organic material.
Some perishable material.
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't even have to be perishable, but maybe, even if it's paper, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it just
Organic material. I mean, you're not going to have
right. No,
bacteria
I
mess
get
with
it. Yeah, I know what you're
organic.
saying, but I've never heard anybody mention that before, and it just struck me that that's a reason, even on the outside, right? If you're handling it, things like that. If you have a clean environment, you have to have something with no cracks or defects in it to
And
contaminate it.
yeah, and to your point, on the outside, if you follow a crack, like you're trying to grind out this crack, if it keeps going,
That's right.
it's then you get to the point where the integrity of the stone is possibly in check, then it's no good. So that would be a reason to dig out the exterior cracks as well.
And Marty,
They would go all the way through.
And Marty can speak to this better than me. But if I was going to drop the ceiling on this thing, what shape would I make the lid? I wouldn't make it rectangular because it's going to have edges that would fail.
Yeah.
Right. So what shape would you make it?
I thought of that too. It's like these have very sharp corners, but they're not 90-degree corners, so they're much stronger because of the prism shape of the lid.
Yeah, it's a big thing in like with knapping stone. Any corner that's 90 degrees or more acute than 90 degrees is easily broken and chipped away. So when you're trying to look for a platform in which to hit the stone with another piece of percussive flaking, you're always aiming for something that is either 90 degrees or more acute angle than 90 degrees so that you can chip that stone off of there. So if it's greater, if it's more obtuse, then it won't chip. It won't chip in deep into the stone and break it.
Yeah, but that's kind of what I wanted to start off with.
Okay, so
That's cool.
we would agree that hold on a second here. My Zoom disappeared for a second. Okay. We would agree that all but two of the boxes in the Serapeum had these faceted, beveled corners, right?
Yeah.
And we're saying that maybe this might be structural. What if it isn't? What if there's a very simple reason why they're that shape? They're all different, right? The lids are different thicknesses.
Yep. Some of them are very
there
tall,
are-
some of them are very flat. Yeah.
Right. So I was looking at that. I was looking at the different lids and saying, is there any consistency here? Is there anything? And then you get that right that curveball that, hey, this one is different. And then so I'm looking at this, and then it struck me. Let me see if I can share this, and you're going to have to. Let's see. For some reason,
Well, I know
it's not letting-
the big one that we got to go see in the normally closed off area has a totally different lid style. Square ends and are sort of a domed, more rounded
For
top.
some
It also
reason-
had a lip on the inside.
There we go.
Can
We're
you see
looking at
that?
the box in the hallway.
Yeah,
There.
the unfinished box in the hallway.
Right. I looked at this, and what jumps out at you immediately?
Well, it's not square. That's the first thing. But what are you
The
talking
lid
about?
wouldn't fit.
It doesn't fit in the
It won't
in the
fit
hallway.
unless the corners were cut off.
Yeah, that's right. You got more room to work. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
so
lids,
what are you talking
the
about?
he's
bu-
suggesting that they cut the corners off. They made the lids prism shaped so that they could move them down the hallways with the lids on them.
Because he's presuming that the hallways are all dome shaped on top.
Most of them were. I looked back through the pictures. There are spots that aren't.
Yeah, most of them
But
are.
to go in, right,
Yeah, most of the hallways have this arched ceiling. Yeah.
right. So that could explain why the shape of the bevel didn't really matter, because they're not uniform, but they're beveled, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a good point. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get a bigger box in there if you cut the corners off. Yeah.
Okay, so that leaves us with the problem of
what you're saying is the lid is beveled roughly so that you could set it on top of the box and move the whole thing down the tunnel. But I don't think we would actually have to take some measurements of the other boxes and lids to see if that would even work. Because it doesn't look to me like the lid's going to fit up there.
Yeah.
well, some lids, and
One of them
I'll
is
put the pictures in.
ridiculously tall.
Yeah.
yes,
One of those
but
lids is just
that's where we were talking. Remember, I was asking whether this could have been a volumetric issue rather than, because some of them, the lids are not very tall, and other
Yes.
ones, the lids are really tall.
Yeah.
So unless we went in there and started measuring the boxes, like the overall heights of them, like this, we're looking at a lid here that's actually pretty thin.
yeah.
There are a few of them that are that way. So I don't know if we've ever really paid attention to how like accurately tall. And again, it's not even how tall it is it at the center, because they could compensate for that, because the archways, the hallways are pretty tall in the center. It's the corners that are the problem. So even if the box is taller, theoretically, we could go back. Next time we go back, we take pictures of this and we can scale it out and we can make this determination, because they could just make the facets bigger, right?
Might need
Some
to
of them, the
scan the whole
facets
place.
are bigger
Yeah.
to get them
Yeah.
to clear. So that's a theory. In other words, this may have been
that's a
a
good
functional.
possibility, yeah.
There may have been a functional reason why the corners are fastened.
Which would be really interesting if every one of those boxes with their lids on would fit through the hallways.
Yeah.
That's a good
That would
question.
be very interesting. Like that they put them together and brought them down in.
Right.
The,
but
the,
that
the
leaves
problem
us
with that is that
That
the
box doesn't-
unfinished box.
Doesn't have a lid on it.
It does well.
Okay,
Not only that,
right.
but it's just unfinished.
Yeah.
So it
Okay.
suggests that they
There are-
finished them down in the hole.
right. There are two boxes
Yeah, and Chuck doesn't
that
matter. He's not
have
in-
square corners and they're
is he?
domed in the center, right? They're rounded,
Yeah.
but the corners are square.
Yeah.
One of them is in an alcove in the main hallway of the Serapeum, and the other one is in that back room that we got to go in. That's got the box stuffed off in the corner. That's a mystery of why.
Yeah.
How did they get this thing in here, and why did they leave it here? And it's different.
Yeah.
It's got the same finish as the one that's in the alcove, and it's got the same square corners that the one in there. Like, here's the, I've got, this is the lid. Unfortunately, the people at home can't see this, but the lid on the one that's in the alcove in the Serapeum is pretty rough.
it's very
It's
rough. That's right.
definitely not finished.
Right.
Well, it's limestone too. It's not even. Doesn't even match. Like all the rest of it, it's very different.
Yeah, well, I'm having issues with my share screen for some reason. It's not wanting to. Okay, there we go.
It's coming up.
You can see it's rough, right? It's roughly finished, but it's got that. It's not round, but
got the
it's
square-
faceted, but it's got that square corners, and then it's tapered in
Sort
the
of
center,
beveled. Yeah.
right? Like beveled, but it looks like at some point they were going to round it once they went and finished it. So I'm like, okay, this thing's got square corners. And that poses a problem with my theory that this might have been done. Of course, they could have taken the lid off and put the box in, right? Well, then we have the problem of the one that they stuffed in the corner. So we Greg and Brian and I spent a bunch of time looking at that thing, and I've got that 360 camera, and we're looking at it top to bottom. We're trying to figure out, what is the deal with this thing? How did they get it in here, right? And I'm putting the 360 camera inside of it. We're looking, and then I ran the camera along the side, because this another thing that's different about this box, and maybe it might be the same way as the other unfinished box in the Serapeum, is that it has that lip, that recessed lip,
Yeah.
where the others appear to be flat on top. These have this lip. So there's a design change.
Are you saying that the box itself has a recessed lip in the edge or the lid?
The lid. The lid has
okay.
the lid actually has a lip that comes down, and
Right.
the box has a recess.
Oh, the box does have
It has a recess. Yeah, I climbed up there.
Yes, it does. Right. So let me show you. So
I believe
I'm
you.
looking. I'm looking at this to understand why did they do this differently. All right. And I'm putting a flashlight on there, and I'm running the camera through there, and I noticed that the lid is not sitting on the box, not on the front side. It's not. And I walked across, and I'll upload video. Maybe this would be something we could put in the Patreon.
Yeah, the lid's sitting on the lip. Yeah.
The lid is sitting on the back edge of the box.
Right.
It's not sitting flat on the top of the whole box. It's
Right.
sitting on the back corner. And I'm asking Greg, I'm like, is it sitting on the back of the box there? And he's like, no, yeah, but it's sitting on this ledge.
Yeah. There's
So behind the box, we've got, it's in this alcove, right? And behind the box, there's a shelf.
Yep.
Built into the wall.
And the shelf, yes, and the shelf just happens to be almost exactly the same height as the box. And I'm like, that can't be a coincidence. So I put the camera in there, and it's very hard to see when we were there. I actually had to look at it on video to really be able to see this very well. But that wall behind the box looks almost like concrete, or it's a conglomerate of some sort.
Yeah, it looked constructed to me. I mean,
Yes, it's constructed.
there were also, blocks that were stacked up.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
when you look at the video and you back out, you notice that entire back wall is a completely different color and a completely different finish than the rest of the room.
Yes. Yeah,
I believe it is very possible that those boxes came in through there. That wall was put in afterwards. Mm-hmm. Because when we walked in from the outside of this RPM, you walk down that staircase, there was a passage off to your left, and you could see there was another wall over there. I think that was an opening.
there was daylight.
They're only showing
coming
you
through.
one
There's
entrance.
there's daylight.
There was daylight coming through a big thing that they built. Like it's some, like, I think that in modern times, they built a wall there, and you can clearly see daylight coming through the cracks of whatever that back wall was. So yeah, it looked like they.
Yeah, there's that back wall. It's much lighter. It almost looks like it has a window up at the top or something, like a square, a rectangular or square opening.
Yeah, I think this is modern.
Right. But in other words, I think that shelf was put in there when the box was still closed. They put that shelf there to be able to push the lid back onto that shelf. Because if not, maybe they were afraid that they'd push the lid, that it would flip over and fall back. Because it seems too much of a coincidence that it's the same height. But how would you build that with the box there? In other words, that would be very difficult. I think they were most likely accessing the backside of the box from the outside. I think that's why those have square corners. They didn't have to go through the hallway that the other ones did. They made a new entrance. This might have been potentially a later civilization, and they were duplicating using cruder materials, and maybe they didn't have the technology to maneuver the boxes the way the other ones did, so they made a new entrance and brought them in through here. And maybe this one, maybe they miscalculated. They couldn't get, maybe is this box bigger than the other one, and maybe they couldn't make the corner once they got it in there. In other words, because that's the mystery, right? How did they get this box in this corner? Well, if it came in from the other side, it's easy. They just pushed it in straight. Something to think about.
Yeah, and that goes to, I made a face a little bit ago when we were talking about finishing the boxes inside, and I was kind of applying Kyle's round granite ball down underneath the step pyramid theory to it. Maybe this along the way, someone turned this into a bit of a collection, and they just started pushing other pieces in there. So the one in the hallway could be just, hey, we found one of these things, and let's just shove it in there too, right? So because it just strikes me, it's really hard to do that kind of work in such a confined area. But if what Marty's saying is right, well, maybe they did move in. So I don't know.
And
just
the
another
one
thought.
that correct me if I'm wrong, you probably have this written down, Kyle, that unfinished box, that limestone box is like the first alcove closest to that other one. In other words, it's almost
Yeah,
right
it's
when
right
you
there
enter.
next to the the other one.
Right. So that's where I say they didn't have to push it down all that hallway
I don't know if
like
I'm
the others.
I don't know if I have pictures of this, but when you go into the closet, what they're calling this, this special access we got, they had some doors locked and then they open them up and we got to go back there and there's a couple of alcoves. One of the alcoves on the left definitely went straight outside. Like maybe it went to a pit in the ground where they could have lowered boxes and moved them right in. Now, what you're talking about behind this huge granite box stuffed in the corner there, I didn't see daylight there. I saw a constructed wall that looked modern to me.
Yes.
So I'm not going to agree that I think that this is evidence of some opening behind it in ancient times rather than something that the Department of Antiquities did because maybe the ceiling was collapsing. I mean, they've done so much work in this place. And this is another area, like in this Serapeum, you can see where they've put these gauges on the cracks in the walls to see if they're pulling apart. They've built these giant steel trusses and stuff inside there. They've bricked up some areas of the walls. So this is another aspect of it that's so hard to tell what we're really looking at. And that I just, when I looked at that constructed wall behind that box, I just thought this is modern.
Yeah, I think it's modern too. That's my argument. I think that
I'm not sure it goes outside.
it
but
makes
could.
it more of a mystery, right? But why put if it doesn't go anywhere, why put a wall
If it was collapsing.
against another wall? It's not supporting the ceiling. It's
No,
just
if the wall
a
was,
wall.
yeah, I don't know.
And they built the shelf, like I said, that just happens to be the same height as the box, so that the lid could sit on it. It's
Yeah, it
it's
looked to
maybe
me
a
like
quarter of an inch or so lower than that, so they could slide the box back, and it just tilted back just ever so slightly. You can barely tell that there's a gap under the lid. It's just sitting there, just like I said. They almost could push it straight back,
Yeah, they
but
got it
they
as
did
far as
have to pry it up because it has that recess.
Yeah, they got it as far as they could without it popping off or flipping off the back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just seems like a lot of work. Like, why would you build a wall back there unless you're covering something up? Because I mean, it's not like you could walk back there.
Yeah, I think
You
Kyle's
climb
suggesting
over the box.
Kyle's suggesting that even if it just ended in bedrock back there, the bedrock may have been falling inward into the tunnel
onto the top
and
of the
onto
box.
top of the box. So they just concreted it up or put brick in there
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me.
just to keep the wall from
Maybe.
falling in.
Maybe. Well,
The
okay,
tunnels in
so-
here are really in bad shape. I mean, they really are.
Yeah.
And
Or
there's giant
even
slabs of limestone falling off the ceiling. Clearly, in some places, that's why they've
maybe it came in through the
reconstructed
one
it.
that you said you saw daylight. Maybe
There's
they
definitely-
took one box one direction and the other box the other direction. But
there's
I
definitely
guess
like a
bottom
giant
line,
steel wall in the back of one of those alcoves that was doors that were clearly. I mean, there's just daylight coming through.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
so
saw it
that's
too.
what I'm saying. I think that these boxes with the square corners came in through a different entrance than the ones that had the bevel tops.
Could be, yeah. It's a good point. It's something we'll have to, try to measure because nobody else is doing it. I mean,
Right.
it's just another data set we're gonna have to slowly collect.
This will be something to look at next time we go there.
Yeah.
I took a lot of video of all this stuff. So gradually I'll be uploading this stuff, and some of this, I've put a little bit in the Discord, but, some of this stuff we can put in the show notes, maybe some of it on Patreon and all. And I think that you'll have a better understanding of what we're talking about. I know this might sound a little bit abstract, but it's hard to grasp how big these things are. This is not a simple task of putting this box in this corner. This thing is massive.
Definitely.
All right, let's take one more break.
The final segment. It's already here. It's crazy, dude. It's the fastest 2 hours in podcasting, folks.
It is.
It goes quick, and then I already miss it. But before we close it out, Chuck wants to mention something about nubs, which I'm keen to hear because, are they for lifting? Are they for just something that Johnson can hammer off of there later? Are they geopolymer fucking spouts, injection ports? What's your hot take, Chuck? Tell me about nubs.
All right. So Marty and I have a similar background of, doing things. You move stuff around. We know how things are moved around. And we're sitting there looking at the nubs, right? and that's what we did when we,
I can't believe you guys were sitting there looking at nubs together. Oh my God. Classic back of busser move.
Better than what Chris was looking at.
I know. Then we talk about him for an hour. So,
I'm sure Wanker spent plenty of time looking at nubs.
I know that's the night. I didn't know if I was going to call him that. Yeah, he's.
Is that not fair? I'm sorry, Wanker.
No,
I called you that on the air.
Plenty of wankers. Yeah. So one of the things is now you guys. So we just talked about the Serapeum, and we talked about one of the unique things about the boxes is that when you have ultra flat surfaces, right, the molecular attraction will keep that together.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's getting pried apart. Right. So that's an important point. So if you're finishing blocks or you're moving blocks from here to there, you have to put, nowadays you put a forklift under them, but you got to get a rope between them. Okay. You got to do something. So you have your conveyance, you're moving the rocks from 500 miles away. You're going to move them over here. It doesn't matter if I'm in Peru or if I'm in Mexico or whatever. If you have a couple nubs on the blocks, that's your pallet. It's like a wooden pallet. These things might be, and they had no problem with smoothing and finishing stones in place. That we see evidence of that everywhere, right?
Yeah.
They're finishing on site because they can get the stuff to meet. They're getting the top and bottom surfaces perfectly parallel. Then they fit the stones and then, so they're doing that. But if you let's just imagine I've got a stone and it's got two nubs on the right side, right on the top. So I set that down nubs up. But the next layer of stones that I'm going to put on, I'm going to put it nubs down, and those two nubs are going to sit on the left side. I can transport these things. It doesn't matter the position of the nubs. It doesn't matter. It matters if they're there and roughly the height's about right. But I can get something between those blocks when I get to the job site to pick them up and move them.
I gotcha. Yep.
It could be as simple as that. And they might have had other ancillary purposes like holding scaffolding or just, you could walk up and down the thing without, I don't know, whatever. But they cut them off. That tells me that it serves some purpose that was not the final purpose.
All right, let me challenge you on this.
Please do.
Did you observe the base layer casing stones of the satellite pyramids next to the Great Pyramid and their nubs?
Okay.
Did you? Did you go there?
I can't remember.
I don't
Marty,
think he went with us.
You went with us. These are limestone blocks that look to me like they were supposed to be cut into the angled casing stones. Now maybe they were supposed to be square at the very base, and the other casing stones went up to meet them, but they had these beautiful nubs, polished, and a single one in the front face at the base of this block with a clearly finished, like almost polished surface. Okay, Marty's pulled up a picture. Yes. And there was one in particular, many of them had scrape marks on the underside of the nubs, which could have come later. It's true, but they just, I don't know, this example, that one right there, Marty pulled it up. There's a clear chip taken out of the front face of this.
Yeah, like they were using it to lever. They're using it to lever up on.
Absolutely.
And it popped out.
And you can see the other ones that are concave underneath on the underside. They're a little more rough, but why would they polish these nubs so beautifully into these
I think
symmetrical
that's the
shapes?
That's the exception, right? I don't know.
Well, you have to explain the most difficult aspects of the problem as well.
Yeah, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think the nubs serve a purpose like that because you don't have to have wooden cribbing to go between them. You don't have to have logs. You don't have to send them back to the quarry and another thing. You don't have to do a bunch of stuff. You just have nubs. And they keep the pieces separated in shipment.
Well, the other great point you made during the tour about the nubs is that any block that has nubs on it was not quarried by the splitting technique.
Splitting method. You
Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
100%.
Yeah.
If it's got nubs on it, you didn't split it to get the rock. I mean,
right. You might have split the original piece, but you cannot split and leave a couple nubs.
Then you cut away everything except the nub. I mean, it's just, it's a high relief carving, which is very hard to do. I mean, it's like, if you're going to do that, why wouldn't you just leave all that bulk on there where you can pry anywhere on the surface of that stone? So your point is a good point that if you turn them on their sides, then the nub is actually holding
the block
most of the block off of the surface of the block underneath. And if the block underneath has a nub in a different position, then you've got a gap, and you can stack these up if they're relatively the same size. So I mean,
they're not stacking them up to the moon. They're just stacking them up, maybe 2 layers in a boat or 2 layers in a thing or whatever.
It's a good point.
They got there. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that they're so oddly placed sometimes, that they're all in random spots. It almost seems like that was secondary. It wasn't necessarily a purely. It wasn't decorative. It was something functional.
Utilitarian.
Yeah.
Now the idea that they are in random positions on the faces of these stones, to me, is simple. It's that when the stone got to the site, they cut it again. And that's why the nub is off center, or, right? Like if you had a larger stone that had 2 or 4 of them.
And it made sense when it was coming from the quarry. But then you get it on site and you kind of cut it.
Like, let's cut this one in half, and we'll use a piece of it here.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Then you have a nub that's like off center.
And thinking about this now, and I go back to the idea that maybe they were quarrying a lot of the limestone right there on the limestone pieces on the inside of the pyramids. Up in there, there's no nubs in there.
Yeah.
Because they didn't matter. They were all oddly shaped.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like the pyramid where they were facing the stones in place, the casing stones.
Yeah, Minkara.
Yeah, I mean, so if they had nubs or anything like that, it didn't really matter. They were all pillowy anyway.
Yeah.
But they would come back and finish it, which
some of them clearly did have nubs.
Mystery, right? That's huge to me. That because again, that's another one of those things like. They just flattened the stone. Like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
That's first of all, you're dealing with the height, but not only that, to me, again, the finer detail thing, they started from the middle and worked out. They had to have a way to maintain the plane because if you were off by a fraction of a degree, by the time you made it to the corner, you'd be outside the stone.
Yeah.
You had to remain completely parallel to the face.
That's why.
You have to have
Over a
fixture.
span
You
that
have to have
big?
a fixture or something.
Yes.
That's
Absolutely.
why I think the surveying like idea is a good argument for those flattened faces on what we think may be all four sides of that pyramid. That they carefully flattened this surface, a fairly large surface, square, where they could fix an instrument and say, okay, this is the exact angle that we want. And from there, they can use it, that small flattened surface as a guide
For the rest
It's your
of the
reference.
project.
It's your reference.
for
It's your
setting
reference points.
the rest of the casing stones as you go up to make sure that the gaps between the blocks completely mate, their faces mate up, and they're sticking far enough out to where when the surface is fully flattened, there won't be any cracks between the joints.
Yeah, the faces mate up below the or above the eventual flattened surface,
That's
the
right.
finished surface. They mate above that so that when you flatten it out, you're not going to have any gaps.
Or maybe they were flat to begin with, and they flattened them to have 8 facets.
What?
They went in there and, in other words, maybe they were flat, roughly. Let's use the other one as an example. They put it in roughly flat, right, 4-sided, and then they went in there and flattened it. They put the 8 facets into.
That's what I'm
They
talking about.
Ground them, right?
But-
They ground those into that shit.
Yeah, absolutely what I'm saying.
Yeah,
100%. But that they only had to go up 4 or 5 courses of stone. Then they flatten that surface and say, okay, this is the angle we want. So all
Yes,
the casing
excellent.
stones above this have to protrude from the edge of the pyramid
A
far
sufficient
enough
amount.
Yeah.
so that they're where they join with each other
Yeah.
is going to be at that plane that they're eventually going to flatten the whole surface. It's very hard to explain this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't-
words.
Right, you have to see it to understand.
I need to draw a diagram, folks.
Yeah. And you can't. Do you do it part at a time, or do you go all the way up and then finish it? Right. I
That's
don't
what I'm
think
saying.
it's-
Like it seems
Yeah.
like that the flattened face
It's a reference.
that they did it on 4 sides of the pyramid when they were only 4 or 5 courses up with the casing stones. Then they could use those flattened faces as a surveying platform to check each casing stone layer as it went up to make sure that it was going to meet that angle.
No, I'm with
properly.
you 100%.
Okay.
See, like
I just don't
one
know
of-
if this. Yeah.
a very good friend of mine he's an engineer that designs a lot of really high-tech components and stuff, and his expertise is in designing components that are their own jig. He design rather than having a fixture and assembling these things within a fixture or using a fixture to properly align the components. He engineers them in such a way that they are their own jig. They are their own fixture. They only fit. They lock together a certain way, and it works from there. It gives you a starting point, and then each piece is already in the proper position as it's being assembled. That is hard to do things. Simplicity is like the most complicated or most elusive thing. It's very easy to come up with complex solutions to challenges,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
hard to
to come up with
make
simple ones.
Yeah, something very, very simple is it's a challenge. So it appears over and over again when you're there, it looks like they went out of their way to make this the hardest way possible, right? Everything was like, well, they could have just done this and saved themselves an enormous amount of work. And like, I think that those things were easier for them than what we perceive them to be.
And then
they were so smart. They built these things with those design principles in mind.
Right. And then there's the other idea that form follows function. And for some reason, the
They needed
function
it, yeah.
required that they do it in this crazy way that seems complicated to us. Like, why did they have to do it make it so complicated? But it actually might have been the simplest way to do it based on what the function was.
And it's also simple to explain if you have a variety of sources for your material, a variety of different crews making things or whatever. The simpler. I'm just looking at the nubs again, and the simpler you have your process, yeah, less errors, I suppose.
Yeah.
Here we go.
So again, talking about complex versus simple, processes.
All right, so we're looking at the unfinished obelisk in the quarry at Aswan.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
2 hours.
Aswan,
Yeah,
Aswan Quarry was an eye-opening experience. First of all, the magnitude of it, but this is an example of something, and this isn't a knock on anybody. This is just the way it is, because I'm just as guilty as anybody of this. When you are looking at pictures and videos and things at home, you form an opinion from a two-dimensional representation of what's actually there. And you don't get the sense of scale very well. You don't get the sense of the three-dimensional nature of some of the shapes and all. So I went there. I wanted to reverse engineer the scoops, right? And I'm like, I want to know how they were scooping this. Were they using a softening, or were they what kind of mechanism could they use to do this? So we get there and we walk around, and we went into areas that probably shouldn't have been, but we walked around this quite a bit. We got some really, really good footage of areas that probably people may not have ever seen before. And we spent a bunch of time going down into the pits, and it's not the unfinished obelisk, it's the other one. I don't remember what it's called, but there's that other one where you can really get underneath it. And that's probably the one that most people have seen pictures of, and they mistakenly think it's the massive unfinished obelisk. But we went down in that area, and I was around one side. Chuck was actually on the other side, because it's a big thing, and we're really inspecting this quite a bit. We're going down, looking at all these scoop marks, in quotation marks, all the way around it. And I sat there, and, you start working your way out, and you can tell that there was a process here. There was a staged process. This is almost like steps. You could see them stepping down as they went into this, and they did this rough outline, and then they worked the stone. And I guess they have what they call them test pits or something. I don't think that's what they are, but they have this stepped look and this scoop look. So I get down underneath there, and I start looking at the undersides, because again, before, for those that weren't there, before you get to see any of this, you have to go into this orientation where they tell you about how they did this with diorite balls. And, and they show the ramps that they used to build the pyramids and all this stuff, which was pretty funny because everybody burst out laughing when they did this. But
Yeah.
I'm under there, and I'm underneath this obelisk, right? And I'm looking at these marks. And the first thing that popped into my head, I go, these are not scoop marks.
Well, you're underneath. It's not clear that it was an obelisk.
It's the other one,
right? It's
but
the other one.
Same.
Same.
It's the same tool.
Yeah, it looks like the same tool. This thing might have been a statue. Who knows what it was going to be? But it's a giant block that they were clearly cutting out of the.
But this one, you can get there, and you really can put your hands on it, and
Yeah,
you can
climb down
inspect,
into
you can walk
the trenches.
You walk all around. That's the thing that most people see is the pictures that most people see of the scoop marks is this. It's not the actual unfinished obelisk, the massive one. It's this thing. But I'm sitting there looking at it, and I recognize this from my background. I look at it, I go, I could do this. I know how to make these marks. I could do it all the time. Back in my shop days.
You think it's a CNC,
Well, so we're sitting there looking at this, and it took me a while because I know this is not going to be popular, because I know people already have kind of, it's definitely they're softening the stone, or they're scooping this material away.
No.
I'm looking there and I'm like, no, that's not what we're looking at here. There's signatures in this. There's signatures in key places. First of all, you notice there's curvature on the undersides of this.
Yep.
Obviously, somebody with a diorite ball is not going to be hammering upward, reaching their arm underneath this thing and hammering upward and making this shape and making a consistent curvature upside down and in a pattern.
Yeah, you're saying that the scoop,
repeatable pattern.
The repeating scoop curvature continues on the underside of the
Exactly.
workpiece. Yeah.
You have to not look at it like a scoop.
I see clear angle changes that are like
Exactly.
repeated over and over along each
Exactly.
trough.
And at the same time, I'm coming around the other side, right?
Yeah.
And from my background, I'm thinking apparently the same things. And there's a point where we kind of met up. And we were like, I know how they did this. He says, I know how they did this too. And it was actually kind of a fun moment. We're still laughing about it. Yeah,
like,
it was
really?
funny.
You see it too, huh?
Because one of the things that that you'll hear that let's say Chris Dunn, right? Tool marks.
Yeah.
What Marty and I were looking at is tool shapes.
Yeah.
And if you take a diorite ball, and there's a photograph of it, I don't think Marty has one, but I've got a bunch of crumbs in my hand from the stuff that's laying all over the place. If you take a diorite ball and you knock and you bust away at some rocks, you end up with a really fine powder. It's agnostic to the minerals. It turns it into basically baby powder. If you pick up what's on the ground here, they look like grindings. They're all different pieces. The mineral pieces come out, and we're both on the track that this is shaped through a abrasive process.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's some kind of abrasive.
Yeah.
Right. Do you see the multiple shapes, repeated shapes there?
Oh, yeah.
It's a step. There are steps. This is a step process.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and I'll upload these pictures into the Discord, and maybe they can put in the show notes so that people can understand what they're looking at here or what we're discussing. But these are diagrams of the shapes that you're seeing in this. There's shapes, these ovoid shapes into the stone, and there's circular shapes above on the underside.
Yep.
But they're consistent. They're the same size, same width, and same heel profile. So we started looking at this and we're like, this is a repeated pattern. And when you start looking at it from that perspective, you can't unsee it. You start seeing the lines, the repeated patterns all over the place, where they were plunging this tool in a stepped manner, each progressive step deeper and deeper and deeper. It's a pattern. And so there's this machine cutting into the stone, and then they move it up and go deeper and move it up and go deeper. And they do this over and over and over all the way around. And it gives you this ice cream scoopy appearance.
Yeah.
But that's not what it is. The heel is too sharp. The heel is absolutely rounded. When you see it on the end, you can see how they came at it from three different directions, right? And it's got this undercut. So you can get a pretty good feel within, I would say, pretty tight estimations of the diameter of this cutting tool, right? It's circular and it's ovoid, like a disc, like an ovoid disc. It's rounded on the top.
Yeah.
Because you can see where they pushed upward with it and it made perfect circles.
Right. Yes.
And the flattening areas on top, you can get those squarish shapes by using it upside down.
Right. You can change the angle so you can make it look different. In other words,
So you guys are reverse engineering the actual cutting tool shape based on the markings that you're seeing.
right. So we got a
cool.
pretty good idea looking at all the different patterns.
So it looks like a UFO, basically, is what you're saying, Marty. I see that you've got these little two.
It's a spinning.
He's got these
flat,
little
fat disc.
two-dimensional diagrams of these ovals, but really, what he's trying to tell us is this actually UFO shaped.
Well, look, we reverse engineered the shape. This is what the profile of the shape would be. Right?
Flat bottom UFO.
Yeah. A flat bottom UFO, right? So now where's Chuck comes in, like, okay, well, how do you cut with this shape, right? Chuck, what would you put in this to cut this?
What would I put in this to cut this?
Mm-hmm.
You're smiling.
Chicken.
No, not chicken.
Oh.
Well, we're talking across the hall in the bus, and we're thinking and Marty, and rightly so, has an idea that you have, there's probably answers to this stuff in plain sight. That's why we went back to the Cairo Museum a second time, right? And what a cutter like this would be roughly a disc shape, probably about, what, Marty, 20-something, 22,
24 and 2 feet.
24 inches and probably about 6 inches high. It would have to have a central shaft on it. And it would be used with an abrasive.
Right. What would you impregnate that with?
I'd put corundum or diamond on it, something like that. And so it would be something that it wouldn't have to be heavy. And it might have cooling fins. I don't know. It could be a variety of shape, but the working surface is a discoid shape that you have to spin on the end of something.
Oh, yeah. I see where you're going.
Yep.
Yeah. So I told Chuck, I go, I have a feeling, because everybody's so invested in the scoop thing, nobody's looking for something else. I said, I have a feeling that there's evidence of this hiding in plain sight. So we made the decision to go back to the museum and look for certain things that would make this possible.
I think it's funny too, after we show them what this is,
I knew it.
Yeah, that shape that you're looking at.
I knew that's what you were going to pull up.
we were in the bus and Marty says, I think it's in plain sight. And I said, like the schist disc. And we both looked at each other and leaned back in the seat and shut our mouths.
Yeah, so the schist disc is a model.
Representation.
A representation
model,
of
right?
the cutting tool.
So everybody can stop right here saying, you can't cut granite with schist and you can't do anything else. If you look at this thing, we think just like, what was I saying earlier? This is just like you have a monster truck and then a model of the monster truck, right? This thing has complex curves in it that you can't just do by bending something. It is very sturdy. And what we did is we went back, we looked at the underside. When we were first there, we didn't really, this wasn't in our heads. But this could be a representation of what someone saw being used all the time. And maybe the original was made out of metal, or maybe the original was made out of whatever. But nobody knows what this thing is. And I got to tell you, it fits
You think
the
it's
size.
you think that's
Central
the cutting
hub.
edge?
It has a central hub. It's 23.6 inches in diameter. The heel profile matches the marks in the stone. So, I mean, there are a lot of coincidences in it. I mean, this thing is a mystery, and it appears to be built to be light so that they could spin it fast. But what those fins that could act as to make the structure more rigid would also cool the head, the cutting head.
Right.
So
and also,
it makes sense.
So are you suggesting it was filled with some kind of cutting material in there to make it?
Not necessarily.
No, but embedded in the actual structure itself.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not suggesting that this is the tool. I think
not
this
at all.
probably
No,
a
of course.
representation of what, like maybe the schist disc was found. It was in the tomb of Prince Sabu, and it was found. He was like 5,000 years ago. I mean, it was this early dynastic period.
Yeah.
So it's possible that they even didn't know what this thing was. They just knew it was important.
Yeah.
Or they made they tried to duplicate it. So it's been a mystery what this thing is. And I think that it's because they have it on display upside down. That's the hub. That's where it attached to whatever powered it.
Oh, okay. The other side is the working side.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
and then you'd have
It's in there
it would be
upside down.
fashioned
That's hilarious.
yeah, and then
It's like everybody's staring at a coffee cup, like, what the hell is this thing for? But it's upside
Is
down.
it a hammer?
Yeah.
yeah.
It must be a hammer. It's got a handle.
I think that elves used to sit on this.
Yeah. So it's upside down. The fins that come up on the schist disc are actually cooling fins for the tool.
For the bottom.
Yeah, it
the
could
bottom,
be,
the
or-
bottom of the tool.
Yeah, it
Or
could
That's
be
why
where-
it has a hub.
Or
Yeah.
it does something with water or whatever. It's
yeah, you wouldn't have a loose. You would never use a loose like they do with cutting with granite abrasives under like water jet, anything like that, because you'd have to have that stuff would be all over the place. Whatever they're cutting with was, either it probably impregnated into the tool and mostly so around the outer edges and
Yeah.
underneath. And then to cut upside down, you just swivel the head of the tool and just cut and just work it.
yeah.
Just work it up there. But we think it's possible. This is
That is
representation
possible.
of
That's really
what
cool,
they
guys.
use.
Great.
It's the right size and shape. Remarkably like a UFO, but that had nothing to do.
Yeah.
Hot takes from the back
this
of the bus,
image-
folks. The schist disc is what they cut the obelisk with.
the tops right there of the stone have the perfect circular shape right there, and the dome both.
That's great.
It's just ridiculously coincidence. I mean, that's a nice sentence. It's a ridiculous coincidence. It's
ridiculously coincidental. Yeah.
yeah, it's ridiculously.
Yeah, the heel of the thing. You now that you know what we're talking about, you see it. You see the edge of the disc, the bottom. Right? You don't see that.
You don't
line
see it at all, right?
right?
Open your eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the.
And
I've been thinking for a while now that it was some kind of spinning abrasive. I just didn't know what the shape was, but I like that the schist disc is actually the working tip. That's really cool. Very interesting, or at least that's the shape.
Right.
You know, they probably didn't use schist, but somebody
couldn't have.
somebody with advanced techniques made that thing. I don't think it was made by primitive people.
Yeah, agreed.
So it's weird that, like, you're thinking like, okay, so the same people who were actually cutting with this tool also made this weird schist model of it.
Maybe it was the blank for the mold. Maybe it was the blank for the mold.
could
and
be.
they used a mold.
Or maybe
metal.
maybe
with diamond.
Yeah. What if someone had, cut 48 obelisks in their career, and this was their thing, and when they retired,
Oh yeah,
and they gave it to them on a plaque,
Yeah.
on a plaque.
There you
Who
go.
knows, right? Yeah, or
it's like a backhoe operator getting a backhoe bucket for
yeah,
retiring.
there you go. Yeah, and one of the things that Marty has a photo up here. There's a photo, and I don't. It's in your stack, and I'm glad he put these shapes in here. But the most interesting shapes where this tool was used, you see that rock blocking you can't walk through there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That was
It's up under there.
Oh,
The shape is the most evident up under there.
Yes.
Yeah,
and there was a strategically. I don't think I put that
I've
in
got
our series.
pictures
Oh yeah.
of it. Mine, yeah.
This one.
it is.
They had right where you could really see the tool the best. There just happened to be a big block in the way, and a strategically placed diorite ball right next to it.
That's hilarious.
So,
Yeah.
and you can see, like, for example, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but between the discs, you can see the high points. So you can see where they were pushing in and grinding and then going in above that and pushing in and grinding. It's this succession of grind, each one being deeper than the one below it.
Right.
And they work their way in.
Right.
Yeah.
It's this repeating pattern over and over and over. And there are some even in along the sides of the unfinished obelisk, there are marks. Didn't have time to work on them to put them in here, but there are marks where the grinder cut along the side of the obelisk. So it's like a line, but it's that same shape, but it's a line rather than a straight cut in and down or up. it's horizontal rather than vertical. It's really interesting when you start.
Yeah, and this is interesting. And mind you, we didn't finish our tool shape quest with this. I mean, there's other stuff too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Right.
Well,
go ahead.
You recorded the video, right? I may have to publish the video of this. There's been so much discussion of pictures.
Yeah, I'm recording the video.
Yeah.
I
So
will
maybe
have to say,
the video will come out later.
I have maybe a counter to your argument against a slurry, and that would be, think of the test pits as sump pump stations. So like if you're running a slurry into this, like you drill your test pit first, then you put your pump down in there and you start grinding away with this slurry, and it's all running down into this test pit, and then the pump is agitating and getting those materials, agitated into the water and then pumping it out. Because
then how do you separate your soft rock that you have to have a centrifuge or something to separate it away from the slurry, because your rock's now mixed in.
What are you talking about? I'm talking about cleaning, because like if you're just cutting dry, that material's falling in the bottom where you're cutting. Well, how are you getting it out of there? You gonna vacuum it out?
Oh, by the way, I didn't say dry. You could spray it with water or something. That's
what I'm talking about. Like
but when I'm talking about a slurry that the abrasive is loose.
Okay, wrong term. I was initially saying that if they were pumping water in there, because it actually would cut better if it had this lubricant, right? This water.
Yeah,
lubricant.
and I think so too. It's just like you use the diamond saw, you're cutting.
Yeah. So the water is flowing.
I have two kinds: water, and the other one's mineral oil.
Yeah. So the water's flowing downhill, whichever. Like if you set up the job and then you drill this test pit with your machine, and then you have a pump down there. So as you're cutting, the water is carrying away all of the cut materials, the grinding materials, and going down into this test pit, being agitated and then pumped out. So
yeah, that brings up an issue that we had discussed, and something that we wanted to look into further. It just, we only had so much time to get this. We wanted to get this out there before people figured out what we were talking about. A couple of people knew we were on some theory, but one of the things that we want to look to see if there's any, like, again, hiding in plain sight evidence is of respirators. Could some of these things that we think are ritual masks or something be respirators of some sort?
Yeah. So and I was just going to say, the water and everything, this may explain why, for example, the unfinished obelisk is on this like angle. The whole thing's tilted, so everything will flow down to the bottom.
Water on it. Yeah.
Right.
See, but that's another thing you have to keep in mind as well, is that they had to have a way to know the angles. Like they had to know to keep the bottom parallel with the top, because you can't see them both at the same time.
Right. I just mean the whole work is on an angle so that you know where to put your pumps. It's always going to be at the back end. Yeah. That's where all your working liquid, your water, coolant, whatever it is going to flow down there, and you can pump it out or reuse it, whatever.
Yeah, when my skepticism about them being test pits, I'm like, that's not. These things are serving a function. They're not test pits.
Yeah, it just makes a lot more sense for that. Like if you're doing it all by hand and bucketing and everything out, why is the whole thing tilted? That just seems like it would make it way harder. It should be flat.
And you have core drills. Whenever you're going to do if you're going to check the competency of rock, why ruin a bunch of it by drilling a giant sump or a pit? Take a core drill and just take a core and say, okay, we got another 50 foot of rock here. We can do this.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're going to dig a sump, one of the things we looked at was, did they use the same tool here to cut that sump hole? Possible.
Yeah.
You already have it on site, right?
Yeah.
It's possible. Yeah.
Yeah,
but I like the idea about collecting water in that. I think it's
and the scoop mark thing. The other thing is, where's the debris? Like there would be a lot of debris from where they were cutting these things out, and there didn't seem.
Where's
like
the scoops? Like if you scoop on ice cream, it goes in your bowl, right?
I mean, this place has been excavated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah, but they'd still be around. They'd be everywhere. The little scoops.
Yeah, you think you'd see the backside of it.
No. You guys,
right?
Okay, hold on. No, I don't think when we talk about scoop marks, we're not talking about like you're actually just going in with a fine spoon and like plucking out this nice spoon-shaped rock.
Yeah, no.
Like an ice cream.
Like
No,
a-
it's the mark
It's
that
the-
looks like a scoop.
It's the shape of the mark. It's not that we think it's actually being scooped out.
No, we know you talked about it, but some people actually
Think
That's
it's
the
scoops.
softening
talk about
stone
it like
people.
it's ice cream.
Yes.
They're
Yeah,
scooping
that's right.
it
Yeah,
down.
they'll soften
Like,
the
no.
rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
You don't need any magic to do this.
I've
You
never
just-
been in that camp of
No.
this. Well, maybe I have been in that camp. I don't remember being in that camp, softening stone camp.
So,
But
of course, this introduces
somebody's gonna nail me
different,
like you totally
different
went
problems,
softening
right?
stone camp.
Because now we're saying, oh, well, you know what, turn these things and all that, right? So we recognize that was going to be a problem, right? So this was another, because we already knew we were going to go look at the shiz disc, because we already had an idea before that was possibly related to what we were looking at. It seemed like it was roughly the right size and roughly the right shape and everything, just from the pictures I had. But then we went back and we confirmed it, right? But we said, we were still following the theory that, hey, there could be important stuff in this museum that's not recognized for what it is.
Yeah, for sure.
So we were walking around looking in cabinets. We were looking for some specific things that we eventually did find, but we stumbled onto other things. And it's funny, just yesterday, somebody stumbled onto part of it and posted it in the Discord. I don't know if very many people saw it, but we had already been investigating this and everything, but I think we're going to come up with a new term. I think there will be, instead of UParts, will be UTEX, out of place technology.
Yeah.
In one of the cabinets, let me stop my share here for a second and pull up something. We were looking through all these cabinets. You know how the museum, there's just,
Yeah, it's a
you get
sprawling
lost in there.
cabinets. You're like, where the hell am I? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You think you're in one part and you end up, you're actually in a completely different area that
Yeah.
you lose. So we're looking at all this stuff and everything's like ceremonial, this and that, and, symbolic this. And then this thing jumps out at me.
Oh yeah, look at those.
Metal gears.
metal.
Metal gears. They're not crowns. They're not decorative. Notice they have square tapered
Yeah.
axles in the center. These things were designed to turn something. Now here's where a little bit of my background comes in, because I've written about, and you mentioned Archimedes at the beginning of this. These things are important. Archimedes is credited with inventing gearing, epicyclic gearing. He was the inventor, roughly 250 BC. So these things could potentially be thousands of years out of place. We don't know. We don't know how old these are. Maybe they were later. Maybe they're, New Kingdom. I don't know. But either way, they're still they should not be there.
What section were you in? Because it could be even later than that. It could be Hellenistic
They were
or
mixed in with
Roman.
a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, no, they weren't. They
Yeah, I
weren't
see
with
that.
that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So this tells you a few things. One thing that's, again, subtle, but you notice each one is a different size.
Yeah.
That suggests that they understood the concept of gear multiplication. That's important because you can do a lot when you can start multiplying torque.
Yeah.
So we thought this was huge, because I don't know how this isn't more. I assume it's not more well known because they're probably put off as being.
There was no plaque or anything.
Oh,
where
no,
you
of
could
course
read-
not.
Yeah,
You notice
think these
that
are-
the way the cut of the gear, these are 90-degree gears. They're right angle.
Yeah. I see that. Yeah.
So they're changing the direction of force too.
Right.
That's important too. That's sophistication.
It's just hard to
So-
base anything off this because we don't know. I mean, this could be not very old.
Yeah. We need to know where these were found and what they think they are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
very interesting.
But pretty interesting, right?
Yes, very interesting.
sure.
Yeah.
Seems like they shouldn't be there.
I mean, there's some giant alabaster bowls that kind of look like that a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Not that you would
when
wanna
we
turn
found
those things.
this, I said, well, if they had gears, they should have had screws, right? Screws are a problem because they were invented in 400 BC, right? They're Archytas of Tarentum is credited with inventing the screw. Archimedes gets credit because he invented some, like a water screw and things like that. But that concept of, which is a screw is a ramp, right? It's a leverage. It's for leverage, right? So I'm like, surely if they had gears, there must be screws somewhere. So we're walking around looking for little screws, right? Something like that. And again, we're going through all these different cabinets, and then we see leaning against the wall in one of the rooms, we see this thing. This gigantic, like 6-inch diameter spiral screw. This thing was designed to turn something reasonably heavy.
And it's next to a mortar and pestle.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah, because it's decorative, obviously.
It's all mixed in.
Is that thing made of wood? Looks like it's made of wood. Yeah.
We think so. It was a little hard to tell. Like, it does appear to be,
Yeah,
but I
like
couldn't
It does
tell
look
you
like
for
a
sure.
screw, though. I completely agree with you. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, this was carefully cut. Look at the end of the spiral.
Yeah.
Again, this is
that's cut out of a
I would
log.
suggest this is out of place technology.
Yeah, because the whole thing is, if you're going to say, well, they're using, and I know everybody gets it, but if you're going to, it's like we're talking about the nubs, right? Make me a forklift now, right? Or we're talking about,
Right.
we're talking about spinning the disc. Okay, make me the machine, right? You need parts, you need tech or whatever, or the echoes of tech.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good angle for sure to look for things like this. This is really good points.
Then we found these weird things. We couldn't figure out what they were. These little sleeves with a square hole in them. And they were different colors. We're like, these things must be colored for a reason. Are they different sizes? Why are they this way, right? What surface do they serve? They are, for some reason, there's a square taper of metal pushed through them.
Like a
And this
bear.
thing
You see where we're going with this?
Yeah, it's long.
Yeah, you can put them together and you can turn things with them. That's like, let me see. I think if I did a little bit of research, I think the concept of the ratchet extension or the socket extension was invented in 1863, but apparently it existed a few thousand years before that. Because that's what this is. It's a multi-piece extension. It's got a square taper between them, and those are the collars that put them together so you can adjust the length.
So
what were they turning? Because it's metal.
right.
They're turning something with this.
You mean like it's a shaft? Is that what you're saying?
It's like a drive shaft
flexible
or
shaft.
flexible drive.
Yeah.
something.
And one of the thoughts was, some of the tube drilled holes are finished off rounded on the
Right.
bottom, right? So if you took a ball shaped cutter and affixed it to something like this, you could turn it and
Yeah.
it wouldn't tear up the sides on the way down.
Right. It'll maintain its center. That's why there might be sleeves of different diameters to fit in different holes. And since you're drilling the holes, they'd be different depths. So they needed to adjust for the depth so
Okay.
they could piece these things together. Again, this I think is a subtle thing, but it's important. It's significant. It's showing these people were more advanced than we give them credit for.
Yeah, just because you don't have dates on these.
I hear you.
It's like,
I hear you.
Yeah, I don't know what we're dealing with here, really.
But again,
I
it could
get
be
your point.
Echoes of it. Yeah, it could be echoes.
Yeah.
Of it too.
Very interesting points. But yeah, like I look at that metal and the way it's rusting, and I'm like, that's iron. And they definitely don't think the ancient Egyptians had iron. So that must be Roman, at least in their estimation. And they would put it in there because it was found in that period.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
Might as well, yeah.
Yeah. We also found these, which suggests scaffolding.
Yeah. Again, I would say this is late period stuff for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Now these are not where the gears and all that stuff, and the gears don't look like they're probably bronze or copper or something. They're not. I don't think they're steel. But again, this is suggesting that they were a little smarter. At least at some point, they got sophisticated.
I just don't think this is considered to be ancient Egyptian. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's kind of where I'm at too.
Yeah.
We're not looking at the same people who were like cutting the obelisk.
Yeah.
We're not looking at the same
No, and we're not.
tools that were creating the boxes or any of this more ancient stuff.
Yeah.
But some of the stuff that we saw in there, we think were used for the doors,
That's possible.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
and it's similar to these.
Yeah, we didn't get into the door hinge conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole.
'cause
That takes a while.
Yeah, we're already way over.
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
We're going to need to call it.
There's too much, boys, to do it all in one show. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, and for those of you listening, that was a bit picture heavy there at the end, but I will post the video. It just may take a couple of days for me to get to it. So I'll put the video up on YouTube for sure. But yeah, Marty, Chuck, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate that. And I guess we'll have to, you got a bunch of other topics, so we'll have to have you back, I guess,
we'll
after
have
the
to do it
holidays. Right?
Yeah, this was my apology to all the stick to pyramids crowd. To make up for sidetracking.
There you
them on
go.
the
We
UFO
finally got
episodes.
Marty. Instead of UFOs, he went straight to pyramids.
He came up with a UFO-shaped cutting tool for the freaking pyramids.
I know.
The guy is consistent, I have to say.
pandering to the pyramid crowd.
Yeah. Well, it was definitely stick to the pyramid crowds are going to love this one for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here that generated for years to come, I suspect.
Yes.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, guys. I think we'll wrap it up there.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
It's great having you on the show. First time, Chuck. Looking forward
Yeah,
to the
thanks
next
a
one,
lot
buddy.
for the invite.
Yeah. Also, real quick, thanks to all of you on the tour who helped us with the extra fees for our luggage for bringing the instruments. We got a bunch of donations for that, so we really appreciate that. Wanted to say thank you to you guys who helped us out on that, because yeah, Kyle and I paid lots of extra baggage fees to carry the guitar and the drum around, so really appreciate the help there. And to all the rest of you who listen and support the show, thank you guys. We love you.
We always have.
Always will.
Get back to work.
Good night, Adamu.
Our
Good
timing
night,
was off.
Good night, Adamu.
off.
Get back to work.
Yeah.
One of these days you'll get it right.
Yeah.